It was one of those nights where the wind feels too sharp, too hollow, cutting through the gaps in the patrol car's doors and seeping under your skin. I was still new to this, still wearing the weight of my uniform like it might somehow protect me from whatever darkness prowls rural roads at 3 in the morning. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I didn't bother heating it again. Not that it mattered. I hadn't felt awake for the past hour, my eyes heavy behind the rims of the fluorescent dashboard lights. The radio crackled, snapping me into attention. Unit 7, we've got a call about a possible break-in at the old Lawson farmhouse. Requesting immediate response, I paused. The old Lawson place. Nobody lived there anymore. It had been abandoned for years after Mr. Lawson passed away. The neighbors had whispered about it, of course. Strange noises at night, lights flickering in the windows when the house should have been dark, and the faint smell of something burning in the air even though no one lived there. I'd laughed those stories off at the station, pretending to be too cool for the rural legends. Now, though, sitting alone in my patrol car with the heater barely keeping me warm, I didn't feel so cocky. Copy that. On my way, I replied, my voice sounding foreign even to me. The road to the farmhouse was narrow, lined with skeletal trees whose branches scratched at each other like claws. I drove slowly, keeping my eyes on the dark shapes along the shoulder. There were no other cars, no lights in any of the distant houses, just the hum of my engine and the distant cry of something I couldn't place. Maybe it was a coyote. Maybe it was a trick of the wind. Either way, I felt it. Something about the stillness pressed against me. As I approached the turnoff to the farmhouse, the road disappeared under a patch of fog that hadn't been there a moment ago. I slowed again. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than they should have, knuckles white. It was stupid, I knew. Fog wasn't supposed to scare a grown man in a uniform. But there was something in the way it wrapped around the trees, how it seemed to rise instead of settle. It made the world look smaller, like the trees were leaning in closer, waiting. I parked the car near the edge of the property, where the overgrown weeds met the dirt driveway. The farmhouse loomed in front of me, black and empty, its windows like dead eyes staring back. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, boots crunching against the frost-covered grass. The air was colder than I expected, sharp against my cheeks. I could see my breath forming clouds in front of me. The front door was closed. Too closed. Not locked, just shut. I'd imagined it swinging on broken hinges or lying open with the darkness spilling out like a warning. But no, it was just a door. Ordinary. I tapped on it lightly, listened for a sound that might tell me someone or something was inside. Nothing. Just the quiet. Like the house was holding its breath, I tried the knob. Locked. Of course it was. I cursed under my breath, fumbling for my radio to call it in. That's when I heard it, a faint thump from the second floor upstairs. My stomach clenched. Not the floor settling. Not the wind. Something deliberate. Someone, or something, was moving up there. Dispatch, I said, voice slightly shaking, though I tried to keep it steady. I think I've got movement on the second floor. Requesting backup. Static. A pause. Then, copy. Unit 7. Backup en route. I nodded, even though no one could see me. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hand as I shined it at the front door. Shadows clung to the corners of the windows, deep and unnatural. The thump came again, this time followed by a scraping sound like nails on wood. I swallowed hard, feeling the cold spike of fear run down my spine. I thought about calling it in, about getting back in the car and waiting for someone else. But something about the farmhouse held me in place. Curiosity, adrenaline, stupidity, call it what you want. I had to see it for myself. The steps creaked under my boots as I climbed the rickety staircase to the second floor. Dust rose in faint clouds, glittering in the beam of my flashlight. I tried to ignore the old stories I'd laughed off, about the Lawsons, about strange visitors, about the lingering sense of eyes following you through the empty hallways. But with each step I felt it. The awareness that I was not supposed to be here, that the house didn't want me. I reached the top of the stairs and paused. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dark and narrow. The thumping had stopped, replaced by silence so thick it seemed to press against my ears. I tried to listen for the creak of floorboards, for any sound at all. Nothing. Just the quiet. And then something faint, a whisper. Not words, not anything coherent, just the sound of someone breathing, shallow and deliberate. I froze. My hand went to my radio, but the words caught in my throat. Who was here? There shouldn't have been anyone. The house had been empty for years. And yet I could feel it, the presence, watching me, waiting. I took another step, the floorboards groaning beneath me. The whispering stopped. A cold draft brushed my neck, though every window was closed. The beam of my flashlight landed on the first bedroom door. It was slightly ajar. My heart pounded. I told myself to breathe, to think logically. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe a raccoon got in through a broken window. Anything but the thoughts crawling in the back of my mind that maybe, just maybe, the house wasn't empty. I pushed the door open. Nothing, just a room. Old furniture covered in white sheets. Dust motes floated in the air. I let out a shaky breath. My rational mind told me I was safe. My gut said otherwise. That's when I heard it behind me. A door creak. Slow. Deliberate. Turning around, I shone my flashlight down the hall. Nothing. I stepped back toward the stairs. The beam of my flashlight caught movement in the corner of my eye. Something at the edge of the hallway, retreating into the shadows. I swear it was a figure. Just for a moment. Human-shaped, maybe. And then gone, my chest tightened. My ears rang. I fumbled for my radio again. Dispatch! Back up! I don't know. Something's here. My voice trembled. Static. Silence. Just the faint hum of the radio. I took a step back toward the stairs, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. I'd heard stories, of course. Every rookie does. Old houses, empty farms, strange noises in the night. Stories that kept me awake. Stories I had always dismissed. But now, here I was, alone in the dark, listening to the house breathe around me, wondering if every legend I had laughed at might be true. Then a thump. From behind me, close. So close it made me jump. I swung the flashlight around. Nothing. The sheets on the furniture fluttered slightly, though there was no wind. I took a cautious step backward, heart hammering, mind screaming at me to run. And that's when I noticed it. A smear on the wall. Dark, wet, not dripping, but fresh. Fresh enough to make my stomach churn. It trailed along the wooden paneling, heading down the hall, like something had dragged itself along the walls. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Just stared at it. The sound of my own breathing filling the hallway, echoing off the walls, loud enough to drown out reason. I don't know how long I stood there before I forced myself to take another step, back toward the stairs. Each step creaked like a scream under my boots. The smear seemed to follow, or maybe it just appeared closer each time I looked. My mind told me to leave, to get back in the car, to call for help. My body obeyed slowly, in fits and starts, every nerve ending screaming that something was watching, waiting. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, I didn't look back. My flashlight shook in my hands, casting jittering shadows on the walls. The front door looked impossibly far, though it was only a few steps away. I stumbled down the steps, the cold air hitting my face as I finally pushed the door open and sprinted toward the car. I didn't stop until I was inside. Engine roaring, hands gripping the wheel like it could protect me from what I'd just seen. I tried to call dispatch, tried to explain, but the words caught in my throat. Just a simple stammered, I'm okay. I'm on my way back. I never wanted to go back to that house. And even now, thinking about it, I can feel the emptiness of the farmhouse staring at me, watching me, waiting. Something about that place isn't right. And I know I'll never forget the way it felt, standing in that dark hallway, hearing whispers in a house that should have been empty. Even now, I can still feel the eyes. I kept thinking about the farmhouse all day, even after the sun had climbed high and the warmth should have chased away every chill from last night, but it didn't. The memory of that dark hallway, the smear on the wall, the faint whispering, it followed me like a shadow I couldn't shake. My partner tried to brush it off. Old houses make sounds, he said. Wind, settling wood, your imagination. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But I knew what I had heard, and I knew what I had seen. That night, I found myself back at the farmhouse, alone. I told myself it was just routine. Check for signs of squatting. Make sure nothing was damaged. All professional, all procedural. But the closer I drove, the tighter the knot in my stomach became. The road seemed narrower this time, trees leaning in closer, whispering with the wind. The fog had returned, thicker than before, curling around the edges of my headlights like ghostly fingers. I parked at the edge of the property, leaving the engine running, and stepped out. The grass was wet, heavy with frost clinging to my boots. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, wood smoke, and something else I couldn't place. Something sour, metallic. It made the back of my throat tighten. The front door was still shut, just like the night before. I hesitated, hand hovering over the knob, the old stories crawling into my mind again. The neighbors' whispers, the Lawsons' tragic deaths, the rumors about the house that refused to stay empty. I shook my head. I had to focus. This was my job. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in protest, a low, wet sound that seemed almost alive. Inside, the air was thick, stale, carrying the faint scent of rot and dust. My flashlight cut a narrow path through the darkness, illuminating peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and the sheets draped over chairs like forgotten ghosts. I swallowed hard. This place hadn't been touched in years, yet it felt present, watching, waiting. I moved through the first room, my boots crunching on scattered debris. Each step seemed unnaturally loud. I heard it then, a soft thump from somewhere deep inside the house. Not upstairs this time. The sound was low, rhythmic, almost deliberate. My stomach clenched. I told myself it was probably the floor settling, but the sound didn't match the creak of old wood. It had weight, presence. Something in the house was moving. I followed it cautiously, flashlight beams swinging from wall to wall. Shadows leapt and twisted in the corners, distorted by the light, or maybe they weren't distorted. Maybe they moved on their own. I stopped in the doorway of what had once been the living room. The furniture was scattered, broken, but nothing had been overturned recently. And yet I could feel it. Something had been here, and it hadn't left. A whisper floated through the room. Just a murmur, barely audible. I froze. My own voice whispered back in my head, telling me to leave. But my feet moved forward anyway. The whisper grew slightly, like someone standing just beyond the flashlight's reach, speaking directly to my mind without forming words. The hairs on my neck prickled. My stomach roiled. Every instinct screamed to run, but I couldn't. I had to see. The kitchen was next. Broken cupboards hung open, plates scattered across the floor, half rotted. My flashlight caught a dark smear along the wall, like the one upstairs, but this time longer, more deliberate. I stepped closer, heart hammering, and realized it was dry, crusted, almost black. I had no idea what it was, but the instinct to touch it, to understand it, warred with every sense screaming at me to back away. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Then the thumping started again, this time from the hallway beyond the kitchen, slow, steady, almost like footsteps. But when I turned toward the sound, there was nothing. Only darkness. Only shadows pooling in the corners of the walls. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was letting the house get to me. But the truth was, I knew better. The shadows didn't belong to the light. They moved against it, retreating, advancing, whispering with their own silent language. I followed the hallway slowly, flashlight cutting slices through the darkness. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each groan echoing like a warning. And then I saw it, a figure at the end of the hall. I froze, heart in my throat, tall, thin, barely there, standing just at the edge of the light. It didn't move, but I knew it was looking at me, watching, judging. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself I had imagined it. I had to have. My mind was playing tricks after the first night, after all the stress of the job, the stories I'd heard, the house itself. But then the whispering returned, closer this time, circling around me. I couldn't tell which direction it came from. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. I moved on, careful, deliberate. The next room was the dining area. Chairs were overturned. Dust coated everything, yet there were footprints, bare, wet, leaving dark impressions on the old wooden floor. They didn't belong to me. They stopped in the middle of the room, stopped, and then nothing. Like whoever or whatever had been here had vanished. I felt a cold draft brush the back of my neck. My flashlight flickered. I spun around. Nothing. Just the room, silent, empty, and waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, of the house itself breathing. I tried to rationalize. Old houses make sounds. Shadows fall in strange ways. But none of it explained the footprints. None of it explained the whispers. None of it explained the way my chest ached with a fear I had never known before. I pressed on to the stairs again. The second floor loomed above, darker this time, heavier somehow. I had already explored part of it the night before, but I needed to check every room. Protocol, I told myself. Safety check. But even as I said it, I felt a creeping dread. I didn't want to go upstairs. Not really. The hallway at the top was narrow, walls cracked and peeling. My flashlight beam danced across portraits long faded, faces staring back with empty eyes. The thumping had stopped, replaced by silence so complete it rang in my ears. I tried to move quietly, but my boots sounded like cannon fire in the stillness. And then, a sound. A dragging. Something heavy, moving just beyond the light. I froze. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it again. Shadows coiling, stretching along the walls, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. They moved with a purpose, sliding and twisting as if alive, responding to my fear. I looked straight at it, heart hammering, and just like that, gone. I stepped into the first bedroom. Sheets hung over broken furniture, dust floating like motes of forgotten memories. My flashlight caught a shape under the sheet, tall, thin, leaning just slightly. I swallowed. Slowly, carefully, I approached. The sheet fell. Nothing. Just a chair. Nothing more. My chest heaved. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining everything, but I couldn't. My instincts screamed that the house wasn't empty, that it hadn't been empty for a long time. I backed out of the room, my flashlight flickering again. The whispering returned, closer, clearer. Still no words, just breath, intent, presence. I wanted to call for backup, wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, trapped, like the house itself was holding me in place, forcing me to listen, forcing me to see. I checked the remaining rooms, each one colder than the last, each one heavier, darker. The shadows seemed to follow, lingering even when I turned my light away. The silence between the whispers pressed against my eardrums, making every heartbeat sound deafening. By the time I left, my flashlight nearly dead, I felt hollowed out. The house had whispered to me, touched me, reminded me that I was not alone, that I had never been alone. And even as I drove away, the wind howling around the patrol car, I could feel the echoes following. I don't know what I heard exactly. I don't know what I saw. But I know the farmhouse is alive. Not in the way a living creature is alive. Not warm and breathing, but patient, endless, waiting, and it doesn't forget. And I don't think I ever will. I never thought I would find myself back inside that farmhouse again. After the first night, after the whispers and shadows, my partner had begged me to call it in, to leave it alone. but something about the place had a hold on me. I couldn't explain it. Not logically, not rationally. It was as if the house had left a part of itself inside my head, a cold, persistent weight that wouldn't go away until I saw it all, until I understood. That night, I parked the patrol car in the familiar spot, the gravel crunching under my tires. The moon hung low, pale and thin, casting a sickly silver light over the land. The fog rolled across the field in lazy tendrils, curling and twisting like it had a mind of its own. I grabbed my flashlight, checked my radio, and stepped out. Every step toward the front door felt like walking into a memory I didn't want to remember. The door was shut again. Of course it was. I twisted the knob and pushed, the old hinges groaning like they were warning me not to enter, and for a moment, I hesitated. The air was heavier here than outside, thicker somehow, full of the scent of dust, decay, and something else. Something that made the back of my throat tighten. I took a breath, forced it down, and stepped inside. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the familiar horrors, the peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and the sheets that draped over chairs like silent, patient ghosts. I reminded myself to keep calm, to take this step by step. Check the ground floor first, then the second. Simple procedure, easy, rational. I started in the living room. The air felt colder than it had the night before, pressing against my skin, biting at my cheeks. My boots crunched on the scattered debris. That's when I noticed them. Footprints, fresh, wet, bare footprints, small and human-shaped, leading across the floorboards. They weren't mine, they couldn't be. I hadn't been here for hours, and the dust had settled since my last visit. Yet here they were, dark and defined against the faded wood. I swallowed hard. My pulse spiked. I bent down to inspect them. They stopped, right in the middle of the floor, not at the doorway, not under a table, just stopped. No trail leading out. No sign of whoever or whatever had left them. Just an abrupt ending, like the floor itself had swallowed the footsteps. I straightened, flashlight trembling in my hands. My brain raced. My training kicked in, but the rational explanations weren't helping. No one could vanish like that. Not human, not in a house with creaky floors and solid walls. Yet here was the evidence, staring me in the face, daring me to understand it. I followed the footprints slowly, careful not to disturb them. They led through the living room, stopping at the archway that opened into the hallway. I shined my flashlight down the hall. Nothing. Just shadows, shifting as if they were aware of my presence, pulling at the edges of the light. The footprints stopped there, and that's when I realized they hadn't gone anywhere. I bent closer to the last print. There was a faint smear, a subtle drag mark that extended just a few inches beyond the footprint. Like whatever had made it had lifted, but left a trace of itself behind. I touched it lightly with my fingertip. Cold, wet, alive somehow. My stomach churned. I pulled my hand back quickly, heart hammering. I couldn't explain it, but I knew deep down that it wasn't normal. Not at all. I moved into the hallway, scanning every corner, shining the beam of my flashlight along the walls. I thought I saw movement, just at the edge of my vision, but every time I turned, nothing was there. My ears strained to catch any sound beyond my own breathing, beyond the subtle creaks and groans of the old house. That's when I heard it, the softest thump. Like a footfall, barely touching the floor, I froze. Every hair on my arms and neck stood on end. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible. The house had been empty for years. There shouldn't have been anyone, and yet there was that sound, and the footprints, and the drag mark, and the weight of something unseen, something watching. I followed the sound cautiously, moving down the hallway toward the kitchen. My flashlight beam bounced across walls cracked and peeling, revealing shadows that didn't quite belong. They stretched and twisted unnaturally as if the light itself disturbed them. My chest tightened. I couldn't tell if the house was shaping the shadows or if the shadows were shaping the house. The footprints led into the kitchen. The floor was covered in a thin layer of dust, but the prints were dark, fresh, undeniable. They led to the center of the room, and then stopped. Again. No trail to the back door, no marks to the stairs, no indication that the person or thing had left. I stared at the last footprint, mind screaming for answers that weren't coming. Then I noticed the smear. This time it was along the edge of the counter, small, deliberate, like a finger or hand had brushed against it. I leaned closer. The smell hit me first, metallic, sharp, tangy. My stomach turned. My mind whispered 1,000 warnings. And still, I had to know. I had to see. I followed the trail carefully, stepping around broken dishes and debris, trying not to disturb anything. The trail didn't continue. It ended at the refrigerator. My flashlight caught something inside the reflection of the metal door. I froze. I wasn't alone. Nothing was there. Just my reflection. But I could feel it. The presence. Cold, patient, waiting. I whispered to myself over and over, trying to rationalize, trying to breathe. I wasn't imagining the footprints. I wasn't imagining the smears. I wasn't imagining the feeling that someone or something had been watching me, playing with me. I moved on to the stairs. The second floor loomed above, darker than ever. The footprints didn't continue upward. They hadn't needed to. I knew that whoever had left them wasn't bound by normal rules, wasn't human. The thought made my skin crawl, but I had to keep going. I had to understand. The hallway upstairs was narrow, shadows pooling in every corner. My flashlight beam trembled as I moved along the floorboards, scanning for any sign of movement. That's when I saw them again. Small impressions in the dust, perfectly formed, leading to a bedroom door at the end of the hall. I stepped closer. They stopped. No drag marks this time. No sign of departure. Just gone. Vanished into the air, leaving only the faintest echo of their presence. I shivered. My chest ached. My hands shook. I wanted to leave. Wanted to run, but I couldn't. My mind told me to stay, to see it, to understand what had been here. I opened the bedroom door slowly. Inside, the sheets draped over the furniture shifted slightly, like something had just moved beneath them. My flashlight caught the corner of the bed, where the last print had apparently led. And there it was, another smear, dark and wet, glistening in the beam. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. My instinct screamed at me to step back, to run, to never look at it again, and then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, deliberate, curling around the walls, through the floorboards, into my very mind. Not words, not language, just breath and intention. Something was here. Something had been here. Something had left footprints that shouldn't exist, and it had vanished, leaving only evidence that teased my reason and my fear. I backed out of the room, keeping my flashlight trained on the hallway. My eyes darted to the shadows at every turn. They moved again, subtle, stretching and shifting in ways that didn't make sense. My chest heaved. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. And yet I couldn't leave. I had to see it all. I had to know. I checked the remaining rooms, but the footprints were gone. Just the faint smears, the dark echoes of a presence I couldn't explain. I traced each step, each mark, my mind turning over every possibility. Human? Animal? Something else? None of it fit. None of it made sense. And the house seemed to mock me. Patient. Infinite. Alive. By the time I left, my flashlight nearly dead, my legs trembling, I felt hollowed out. The footprints had vanished, but their memory lingered, etched into my mind. Every step I had taken felt like it was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards like a warning. And even as I drove away, the fog curling around the patrol car like fingers, I could feel the farmhouse following me, waiting, patient, eternal. I don't know who or what left the footprints. I don't know where they went. And I know deep down I may never understand. But I know this, the house remembers. And now somehow so do I. Even now I can still see the prints in my mind, dark against the faded wood, stopping abruptly, as if whoever made them had vanished into nothing, leaving me alone with the sound of my own fear. I thought leaving would be easy. That's what I kept telling myself. One last sweep of the farmhouse, a few photos for evidence, and then I could get back in the car and drive away. Back to warmth, back to light, Back to a world where shadows didn't move and whispers didn't follow you. But leaving turned out to be harder than I imagined. I stepped outside, expecting the familiar gravel driveway and the frost-covered grass. But the world had changed. The fog I had seen before wasn't just on the ground, it was thick, curling around the farmhouse like living fingers. It clung to the trees, curling up their branches, wrapping around the corners of the porch. My headlights barely cut through it. The beam was weak, flickering as if the fog itself resisted illumination. I slid into the driver's seat, shivering, hands still trembling from the cold and the memory of the footprints and the shadows. I started the engine. The car roared to life, but as I turned onto the driveway, I realized something was wrong. The gravel beneath my tires seemed endless, stretching farther than it should. I had turned the wheel, expecting the familiar curve of the road, but it wasn't there. Just more fog. More nothing. I tried to reverse, thinking I had misjudged the turn, but the car didn't respond the way it should. It slid slightly, as if on ice, though there was none. My stomach turned. Panic rose, sharp and bitter. I told myself to breathe, to think, logic, rules, roads lead somewhere, cars move, people leave, right? I drove slowly, cautiously, but every turn I took led me back to the same spot. The farmhouse, looming like it had grown overnight, larger and darker, its windows like dead eyes watching me. I rubbed my forehead, trying to shake the disbelief, trying to tell myself it was a trick of the fog, a misjudgment. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The wind picked up, cold and wet, whipping against the patrol car like a warning. The fog thickened, curling around the tires, pressing in on the windows. I couldn't see the road, couldn't see the edges of the driveway. The trees on either side seemed closer now, their skeletal branches tapping against each other in a rhythm I couldn't place. I felt small, trapped, a puppet in a house's game I didn't understand. I tried to call dispatch. My fingers fumbled with the radio, but there was nothing. Static, a high-pitched whine, and then silence, the kind of silence that presses in heavy and expectant. I spoke into the radio anyway. Dispatch! Come in, I'm stuck. I can't. My words cut off, swallowed by the fog, by the emptiness outside, by the house itself. I turned the wheel again, desperate, following instincts more than memory. Left, right, straight, nothing worked. Every turn brought me back to the same driveway, the same front of the farmhouse, the same windows staring like eyes that had waited decades for me to arrive. I tried to step out of the car again, to look for markers, for something real, but the air was thick, almost solid, pressing against my chest. My boots sank slightly into the frost-covered grass, and when I looked up, the farmhouse had shifted. Not physically exactly, but something about it was different. Taller, darker, more alive. I climbed back into the car, heart hammering. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly I could feel the bones of my fingers pressing against the leather. I tried to start the engine again, hoping if I drove fast enough I could escape. But the car wouldn't move. I pressed the accelerator, nothing. My stomach turned. Fear pooled in my gut, sharp and cold. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to center myself to remember the route I had taken to get here. But my memory betrayed me. The trees, the road, the driveway, they were all wrong. Curved differently, taller, narrower, and the fog. It had a rhythm now, like it was alive, breathing around me, controlling me. My pulse pounded in my ears. I was alone. I was trapped. I was not meant to leave. I remembered the footprints, the smears, the shadows, the whispers. Everything I had seen inside the house, it wasn't done with me. The farmhouse didn't want me to leave, and somehow, impossibly, I believed it. Not with my mind, but with every part of me. I tried again, turning the wheel, following the road that should have led back to the main street. But each turn led me back to the same spot. The fog shifted, thickening in one direction, thinning in another, guiding me, pushing me, keeping me inside its grasp. I realized then, with a cold, sinking horror, that leaving wasn't an option. Not tonight. Not ever. I tried to call someone on my cell phone. No signal. Dead. I pounded the dashboard in frustration, but it changed nothing. The fog seemed to respond, curling tighter around the car, pushing me back toward the house. I could feel it, a cold pressure, like invisible hands pressing on my shoulders, guiding me, warning me. I tried to reason with myself. This was impossible. Roads didn't just rearrange themselves. Cars didn't just stop. Fog didn't trap you. None of it was real. And yet the evidence in front of me said otherwise. The farmhouse had made a decision, and I was now a part of it. I glanced at the windows. The house loomed closer, the shadows at the edges darker, denser. I could feel their gaze on me. I wanted to look away, to drive in a direction I didn't know, to escape. But the eyes followed, waiting, patient, knowing. I couldn't move, couldn't look away, couldn't leave. The wind picked up again, a low howl that wrapped around the car, through the vents, into my ears. It wasn't the wind outside. It was something else. Something alive. Something that had been waiting, centuries maybe, for someone to step inside its domain. And I had. I had come back willingly, and now I couldn't leave. Time passed. I don't know how long. Minutes? Hours? It felt like days. Every attempt to drive, to escape, led me back to the same spot. The fog shifted with me, moved with me, changed with me. I couldn't tell up from down. I couldn't tell left from right. I was trapped in a place that refused to exist logically, a world held together by the house itself. I started to feel dizzy. My head spun with the impossibility of it all. My breath came in short gasps. The cold pressed against my skin, sinking into my bones. And the house, it waited, always, patient, eternal. I realized then, with a clarity that made my stomach turn, that it didn't need to chase me. It didn't need to hunt me. I was already inside. I would never leave, and still I tried. I turned the wheel again, desperate, hoping, pleading, and still I ended up back at the driveway. The same fog, the same trees, the same windows staring at me like silent witnesses. My heart thudded painfully. My fingers cramped around the wheel. My mind screamed at me to stop, to give in, to accept the truth. But I couldn't. I had to see. I had to try. Hours, or maybe minutes. Later, the fog began to lift slightly, enough for me to see the outline of the road beyond. I felt a flicker of hope, shaky and fragile, like a candle in the wind. I drove slowly, cautiously, following the road with every ounce of attention I had. And yet, every shadow along the trees seemed to twist toward me. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper warnings I couldn't understand. Finally, I broke free. The road opened, familiar now, leading back to the main street, the lights of town in the distance. Relief crashed over me like a wave, a tidal rush that made me dizzy. But it didn't last. Not really. Not completely. Because even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel the weight of the fog pressing in. The house waiting. Watching. The impossible footprints, the dragging smears, the shadows that don't obey logic, they're still inside my mind. Still there when I drive past empty fields, still there in the quiet hours before dawn, when the wind moves just a little too sharply and the trees whisper like they did that night. I left the farmhouse. I drove away. But I never left it behind. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I can hear the fog curling, moving, guiding me back, waiting for the moment I slip, the moment I look away, waiting for me to understand what it really means to never leave. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, just me, the car, and the endless stretch of rural road under a black sky. I had driven these back roads a dozen times, maybe more, and I thought I knew every turn, every tree line, every dip in the asphalt that could hide a deer. But that night something changed. Something small, almost imperceptible at first, and by the time I realized it, I had gone too far to turn back. The radio crackled with faint static. My partner had gone home early, leaving me alone on this stretch of County Route 14. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and fog curling along the road like smoke from a long-dead fire. I was tired, more tired than I had realized. My eyes kept catching shapes at the edges of the headlights. Nothing I could identify, just flashes of black and shadow, and I blamed it on fatigue. That's what I told myself. I reached a fork I didn't recognize. One road seemed familiar, a gentle curve leading back toward the main highway. The other, narrower, overgrown, unmarked, looked like it hadn't been used in years. My instincts shouted at me not to go down it. I hesitated, fingers tightening on the steering wheel. But there was something about it. Alluring almost. A faint glow in the distance, like a lantern hanging in the trees. I convinced myself it was probably another farmhouse, maybe a light left on. I turned the wheel. The tires crunched over gravel and dirt, the car bouncing slightly as I moved into the narrow lane. The fog thickened instantly, curling around the car and into the trees. My headlights barely penetrated it, and the warmth of the cabin didn't feel like protection anymore. Every shadow seemed too deep, too black. The branches arched over the road, scraping at the roof, whispering against the metal like fingernails over glass. I told myself to focus. I had been down worse roads, dirt lanes where the edges disappeared and trees leaned too close. Just stay calm, I thought. Check your mirrors. Keep your speed low. Keep moving forward. The lane twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense. I could have sworn I had gone past this curve before, but the trees looked different. The fog shifted with me, curling at odd angles, always blocking what lay ahead. My pulse quickened. Something about the air made it harder to breathe, colder than it should have been. My windshield wipers moved in a slow, deliberate rhythm, though there was no rain. My headlights flickered once, twice, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement, something moving against the trees. Fast, darting, but every time I blinked, it was gone. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, a deer, a raccoon, anything ordinary. But the shapes kept appearing at the edge of my vision, always just far enough to make me doubt. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, eyes straining to catch more than vague movement. I felt observed, like the woods themselves were leaning in, watching, judging. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down, to focus on the road. That's when I saw the first sign. A mailbox, old, weathered, leaning at a dangerous angle with a name carved into it, Morrow. I didn't recognize it. The road had no signs, no markings, no houses I knew of. It wasn't on any of the maps I carried. The mail slot was empty, but the name chilled me. I couldn't place it. It didn't belong. I tried to keep driving, keep moving forward, but the lane seemed endless. I passed more trees, more fog, more darkness. No houses, no intersections. Only the faint glow ahead, flickering like a candle in a storm. My stomach knotted. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to get off this road, but the way I had come seemed different. The curve I had just passed didn't exist anymore. I blinked and it was gone. My pulse thundered. I tried the radio. Static, just static. My fingers shook as I twisted the knob, flipped the switch, cursed under my breath. No signal. I wasn't even sure where I was. The headlights illuminated the road ahead just enough to keep me from swerving into the trees, but not enough to feel safe. The glow ahead seemed to beckon, almost like it knew I was coming, like it was leading me deeper. I slowed the car, trying to get my bearings. That's when I noticed the air itself felt heavier, pressed in. Like someone had draped a blanket over the world, and the fog was just a mask for something worse. The trees seemed to lean closer, branches creaking in ways that weren't quite wind, and I swear I heard whispers, low, almost imperceptible, brushing against my ears. No words, just intent. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. I wanted to be imagining it. The glow ahead flickered, wavered, and then I realized it wasn't a lantern or a house. It was just light, impossible and shapeless, hovering between the trees. It didn't move with the wind. It didn't belong. My gut clenched. I wanted to turn around, to leave this road behind, to forget I had ever driven down it. But the road had changed again. The lane behind me had vanished. Or maybe it never existed. I drove on, more cautiously, every nerve alert. The fog thickened further, almost solid, like I was driving through clouds that had weight. The branches scratched the car again, but differently this time. Deliberate. Slow. Testing. I imagined a hand brushing across the roof, fingers curling just slightly, and I shivered. My radio crackled again, static, no voices. Just a high, piercing whine that made my ears ring. Time became impossible to measure. Minutes? Hours? It didn't matter. Every turn seemed to lead me deeper, farther from the world I knew. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, reaching, curling, almost conscious. My heartbeat pounded in my chest, loud enough that I could hear it over the hum of the engine. My thoughts raced. I tried to focus on the basics. Keep moving. Keep breathing. Keep your hands on the wheel. Simple, routine, logical. And then I saw it, a figure, just for a moment, standing at the edge of the headlights. Tall, thin, motionless, not human and yet unmistakably aware. I blinked, and it was gone. My stomach dropped. I slammed my hands on the wheel. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. My voice would have carried into the darkness, into the fog, and I wasn't sure I wanted anything to hear me. I tried to remember the last sign I had passed. Trees, fog, that impossible light, and now the figure. Nothing matched what I had seen before. My map, my GPS, my memory, they all failed me. The road had become a labyrinth, a twisting corridor of trees and shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. Panic clawed at my chest. I gripped the wheel tighter. I tried to call dispatch again, no signal. I tried my phone, dead, and then I realized I didn't know where I was. I couldn't find the beginning of the road, the point where I had taken the wrong turn. It had vanished. I had vanished into it. The glow appeared again, closer this time. Floating, impossible. It didn't illuminate the path ahead. It just hung there waiting, patient, silent. I tried to turn the wheel, drive past it, but the car felt heavy, as if the fog itself resisted me. My mind raced. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it's a trick of light. Maybe it's fatigue. Maybe I imagined the figure. But the fear in my chest told me none of it mattered. The road bent again, unnaturally, wrapping around itself, and I realized the only way forward was to follow it. I had no choice. I drove slowly, each inch deliberate, eyes darting to the trees, the fog, the light. I felt observed, watched, tested. Like the road itself was alive and I was nothing but an insect caught in its path. Eventually, after what felt like hours but could have been minutes, the trees began to thin. The fog lifted just slightly. I glimpsed the familiar lines of the main road ahead. Relief crashed over me, but it was fleeting. The memory of the wrong turn, the figure, the impossible glow, and the whispering fog stayed with me. It clung to my mind. I knew I had been somewhere I shouldn't have, somewhere the world had forgotten, somewhere I could never forget. I made it back onto the familiar road. The headlights revealed the stretch of asphalt I knew, the signs, the empty fields. Safe, real, logical. I slowed the car, heart still hammering, and tried to breathe normally. Tried to shake the feeling that the trees were still leaning in, still watching. But I couldn't. That road had marked me. I had seen something impossible, something patient and deliberate, and I knew I would never truly leave it behind. Even now, when I drive past unmarked lanes, my mind flickers back to that wrong turn. The fog, the figure, the impossible glow. And I know deep down that roads like that exist. Roads that twist and shift, that wait for someone to wander down, and once you do, there's no turning back. After the wrong turn, I thought I'd seen the worst that road could throw at me. But driving back onto the main stretch didn't bring comfort. It brought unease. Something about that night had seeped into the land itself, into the air, and I could feel it pressing at the edges of my mind. Every tree seemed too close, every shadow too long, every sound too deliberate. I kept driving, trying to shake the memory of the fog, the figure, the impossible glow. But then I saw the first farmhouse. It wasn't on any map. I hadn't passed it before, or at least I didn't think I had. A small white house with peeling paint and darkened windows, set back from the road, half hidden by a line of tall, thin trees. Lights flickered inside, though there was no sign of life. I slowed down instinctively, gripping the wheel tighter, feeling a prickle of awareness crawling up my neck. Something was off. Always off. I blinked, and the house was gone. Not behind the trees, not hidden by the fog, not a trick of the headlights. Just gone. The road was empty, fields stretching away into darkness as if the house had never existed. My heart jumped into my throat. I scanned the edges of the road, gripping the wheel like a lifeline. For a moment, I questioned my own eyes, my mind. Surely I had imagined it, but then another appeared. A bigger one this time, red brick, with a sagging porch and a broken fence. I could see the faint outline of furniture through dusty windows, and the smell of wood smoke, or maybe just memory, seemed to reach me as I drove closer. I slowed, and the air felt heavier, thicker, as though the house itself had breathed on me. I blinked. Gone. And another appeared, further down the road. This one looked newer, almost normal, though its windows reflected nothing. I slowed again, heart hammering, and the unease turned into something sharper, fear. The land itself wasn't behaving normally. The road didn't just run past houses. It seemed to fold around them, hold them, and then release them, leaving nothing behind but empty fields and fog curling like smoke. I tried to rationalize. Maybe these were old properties I'd never noticed. Maybe I was tired, my mind playing tricks after the last night, but every instinct in me screamed no. This wasn't fatigue. This was deliberate. The land itself was wrong. I passed a clearing and noticed something in the distance. A farmhouse sitting on a hill, perfectly still. I blinked and it disappeared. In its place, there was nothing. The hill rolled like a normal hill again, empty and quiet. I could feel my pulse quickening, my palms sweating. This wasn't just visual trickery. This was impossible. The land itself was bending reality around these houses. I slowed the car to a crawl, scanning the road ahead. Every time I thought I could get my bearings, another farmhouse appeared. Each one different, each one impossible in its own way. One had a porch swing moving in the wind, though there was no wind. Another had a window slightly open, revealing a darkened interior, and I thought I saw a figure inside. But when I blinked, nothing was there. I told myself to stay calm. Focus on the road. Don't look at the houses. Don't imagine them. But the instinct to look was overwhelming. I had to see. I had to know. Every part of me wanted to stop, to turn around, to leave this stretch of road forever. But curiosity, dangerous. Insistent curiosity kept my foot on the accelerator. The houses weren't just appearing and disappearing. They seemed to react to me. Every time I slowed, one would appear closer, as if waiting for me to look directly at it. Every time I accelerated, one would vanish, replaced by empty fields. I felt like I was driving through a world that had its own consciousness. A world that was aware of me, measuring my fear, testing my resolve. I passed another farmhouse. Smaller this time, painted yellow with shutters hanging crookedly on the windows. The porch steps looked unstable, rotting. And yet, as I approached, I could see footprints in the dust on the porch. Human footprints, bare, leading to the front door. I wanted to stop, to get out, to see who or what had left them. My instincts screamed at me. But before I could make a decision, I blinked. The house was gone. The footprints gone. Only empty grass where the porch should have been. Panic started to creep in. My hands shook on the wheel, my vision blurred, and the headlights bounced against the fog. The road ahead twisted unnaturally, like a ribbon stretching and curling in ways it shouldn't. I had passed this stretch before, or had I? I couldn't tell anymore. I couldn't tell up from down, near from far, reality from something else entirely, and then I saw it again. A house sitting in the middle of a field, no road leading to it, no driveway, nothing. A simple white farmhouse with a single window lit from within. I slowed. My heartbeat was deafening. And then I saw movement. A figure. A silhouette at the window. Watching. Waiting. I blinked. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. My pulse raced. I tried to move the car forward to leave the field behind, to put the house out of sight. But the car refused. The road, or the lack of it, was no longer continuous. The tires spun slightly, but the vehicle didn't advance. And then the figure was gone. The light vanished. The house melted into the night. I was shaking now, truly shaking, and the fog had thickened into something almost solid. It clung to the car, pressing against the windows, curling over the hood like smoke that could choke. I tried the radio. Static. No signal. My phone? Dead. Nothing. I was alone on a road that didn't behave like a road, surrounded by houses that didn't behave like houses, in a world that didn't obey reason. I kept driving, following what I thought was the main stretch, but the land itself seemed wrong. Fields rose where none should have been. Trees leaned in at impossible angles, casting long shadows that moved independently of the headlights. Every house that appeared seemed alive, as if the land had grown it for me, for my eyes, for my mind to witness. I could feel the land watching me, aware of my presence, patient and deliberate. I passed another farmhouse. This one had smoke rising from the chimney, but there was no warmth in the air, no smell, just the sight of it, impossibly still, and a porch with chairs that seemed to shift subtly when I looked away. I blinked and it vanished again. Nothing remained but empty earth and fog. By this point, I could no longer trust my senses. I wasn't even sure if I was moving forward or if the road was simply rearranging itself beneath the tires. The houses, the fog, the trees, they all seemed to respond to me, to my speed, to my attention, to my fear. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to drive until my headlights showed the familiar highway, to escape this impossible stretch. And yet, I felt trapped. The land itself wouldn't allow it. Time lost meaning. Every blink felt like hours. Every heartbeat echoed against the impossibility around me. I could see glimpses of the houses out of the corner of my eye. Some old, some new, some with doors slightly open, others with windows black as void. And every time I tried to focus, to understand, to rationalize, they shifted, changed, vanished, reappeared, always just out of reach, always impossible, always patient. I wanted to scream. I wanted to accelerate, to leave, to force my way out of this place. But even as I pressed the pedal, the road bent beneath me, twisting like a ribbon, curling around unseen obstacles, leading me past yet another disappearing farmhouse. And I realized something my mind refused to accept. I wasn't just driving down a road. I was inside it. The land itself had swallowed me. By the time I finally saw the lights of the highway, faint and distant, I felt hollowed out, exhausted, shaken to the core. The houses hadn't followed me onto the main road, but I could still see them in my mind. Each flickering, shifting, impossible structure. Each vanished porch and darkened window. Each presence that had watched me from behind glass that never existed. Even now, when I drive past open fields, I can feel it. That stretch of road is still there, just beyond perception. The land remembers. The houses remember. And so do I. I survived the night. I made it back. But a part of me never left that road. And I don't think I ever will. I shouldn't have picked up the hitchhiker. I knew it the moment he stepped onto the side of the road. Tall, thin, wearing a dark coat that seemed heavier than it should be for the season. His thumb stuck out along the shoulder of the highway, eyes fixed on me as I slowed the patrol car. There was something about him that made my skin crawl. Not a threat exactly, but a warning. I hesitated. The road was quiet, empty, and yet I felt watched. The fog that had lingered along County Route 14 had followed me onto this stretch. Thin, curling wisps brushing against the edges of the headlights, wrapping the trees in silver threads. He didn't move as I rolled the window down, just stared, and then impossibly smiled. I sighed. "You sure you want to ride?" I asked. My voice sounded louder than I expected in the quiet night. He nodded slowly. "Yes, please." I unlocked the door and he slid in without a word. The car smelled faintly of damp wool and something I couldn't name. He didn't glance at me, didn't acknowledge the patrol car's presence, didn't even fidget with the seatbelt. He just sat there, still, calm, like he had been waiting for me all night. The road ahead twisted through trees, black branches pressing against the edges of my headlights. I tried to make conversation, to calm my own nerves. "Where are you headed?" "Just down the road," he said. His voice was soft, even, but there was something strange about it, a timbre that didn't quite belong to a human throat. "I know what you'll see before you see it." I laughed nervously. "You mean like a warning about deer or a pothole?" He shook his head slowly. "No, not that. Things you haven't noticed yet. Things that will happen if you don't pay attention, if you follow the road too closely, if you blink, if you doubt what your senses tell you." I frowned, unease crawling up my spine. "Are you serious?" "Yes," he said. And then he began to tell me things. Not in riddles, not in cryptic phrases, but events. Real specific events that would happen in the next few minutes. "The next curve will have a fallen tree," he said. "Your left tire will brush against a branch, and you will feel it scrape along the rim." I glanced ahead. A curve approached. I slowed. unsure if I should take him seriously. My left tire hit nothing. I exhaled, forcing a laugh. Lucky guess, I guess. No, he said calmly. It's not luck. It's observation. You are about to pass a series of farmhouses. One of them will have smoke rising from the chimney, though no fire is visible. You'll notice the windows are black. Don't look too long or you'll regret it. I swallowed hard, feeling a chill coil in my stomach. And then it happened. Smoke rose from a chimney. The house seemed ordinary at first, but the windows, they were pitch black, reflecting nothing. Not the car, not the sky, nothing. I blinked, trying to shake my disbelief. You were right, I whispered, voice barely audible. He smiled faintly. I always am. But observation isn't enough. You must be aware. Reality will bend if you forget that. I didn't understand what he meant. I wanted to argue, to dismiss him as some strange wanderer, maybe a kid playing a game. But the truth pressed against me like the fog outside the car windows. The road seemed to shift beneath the tires. Trees leaned closer, twisting slightly as we passed. Shadows moved against the edges of my vision. The air was thick, dense, almost tactile. What do you mean? Reality will bend? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. You will see soon enough, he said. This land doesn't obey the rules you trust. Pay attention. Don't blink. Don't doubt. What you see may not be what is, and what is may not be what you see. I tried to laugh again. The sound caught in my throat. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, yet I felt them piercing through me, seeing not just what I saw, but what I thought, what I feared. The headlights picked up something in the distance, a farmhouse that appeared briefly, then vanished before I could take it in fully. I blinked and it was gone. I glanced at him. Did you see that? He didn't turn his head. You blinked. You missed it. That is why I warn you. You must watch. Pay attention. The road, it is not stable. The houses, they are not permanent. And the land itself, it remembers. I gripped the wheel tighter. My pulse hammered in my ears. The land remembers? Yes. The land keeps the memory of what has happened here. The people, the events, the lives. It folds them into itself, and sometimes it shows them again, or something else shows them. A chill ran through me. I didn't know whether to stop, to turn around, or to keep driving. But the hitchhiker's presence was unnerving. He seemed to radiate calm, but also an insistence, a silent warning that I had to follow, that I had to see. And then he began to speak of things yet to happen. Not generalities, but specific moments. The next curve will have a broken fence. A shadow will pass the edge of your vision. A crow will land on the tree to your left, and it will caw twice before flying away. You will hear a whisper, but only faintly, like the wind itself is speaking. You must not respond. I felt sweat prickling my skin. Every word he spoke happened exactly as he described. My left tire brushed against a broken fence. A shadow flitted at the edge of my headlights. The crow landed and cawed twice before taking off. A faint whisper drifted through the trees, curling against the windows like smoke. I didn't move, didn't respond, just drove. I don't understand how you know these things, I said finally, voice shaking. I told you, he said. Observation, awareness, and a little patience. You must remember the world here does not obey ordinary rules. Watch or you will lose your place in it. I swallowed hard. The road ahead twisted unnaturally, like it was rearranging itself beneath my tires. Houses appeared briefly on either side, glimpsed in the periphery, then gone before I could focus fully. Trees bent and leaned, not in the wind, but as if acknowledging my presence. My pulse raced. I could feel the fog outside pressing against the car, and inside the atmosphere felt dense, like breathing through water. Why me? I asked. Why warn me? He finally turned his head slightly, enough for me to see a flicker of expression in the moonlight. Because you see, most don't. Most follow blindly, trusting that the world will obey. This road, these lands, they do not. You must see to survive it. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but even as I thought that, the world around me bent in ways I couldn't comprehend. A farmhouse appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the trees, and in the distance, a figure stood in the middle of the road, impossibly still. I blinked and it was gone. Focus, he said softly. Do not blink. Do not doubt. Do not allow the land to guide you. Guide yourself. Watch. I kept driving. Every word he spoke manifested in real time. Every caution, every detail, every prediction was true. My mind reeled. Logic no longer applied. Fear mixed with disbelief, and every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave, to run. But the road refused to behave as I expected. It twisted, folded, and displayed visions of houses, shadows, and figures that seemed alive, waiting, deliberate. By the time the hitchhiker asked to be let out, we had traveled miles that should have taken minutes. I slowed, gripping the wheel like my life depended on it because I realized it did. The fog thinned slightly as we reached a small pull-off, just barely wide enough for the patrol car. "Here," he said. "Step out and continue forward. Remember what you've seen. Remember it always. And never forget." "The land remembers too," I nodded numbly. He opened the door, stepped into the fog, and vanished before I could even blink. No footprints, no sound, just nothing, as though he had been swallowed by the night. I sat in the car for several minutes, unable to move. The road stretched before me, normal in appearance, but I knew better. The houses, the shadows, the bending land, they hadn't gone. They were still there, waiting, patient. And the memory of him, the hitchhiker who knew too much, clung to me, a weight pressing at my chest, a warning I couldn't ignore. Even now, I see him in the corner of my mind, standing silently at the edge of the road, reminding me that reality is fragile, that the land remembers, and that some things, some people, exist to show you what you cannot yet comprehend. And I know that if I ever take another road at night alone, I may not be prepared for what is waiting to be revealed. I never thought fog could be heavy. Not like that night. Not like the kind that presses against your skin, fills your lungs, and bends the world into something unrecognizable. I had been driving the patrol car along the familiar back roads, the same ones I'd known for years. But as soon as the fog rolled in, everything changed. It came suddenly, without warning. One minute, the road was clear, and the next, white mist clung to the asphalt, curling between the trees, rising from the fields like smoke from a fire that had never existed. I slowed the car, thinking it would pass, thinking I could wait it out. But it didn't pass. It thickened, wrapped around the car like a living thing. The headlights barely cut through it. The beams scattered in all directions, bouncing off the fog, leaving long, shifting shadows that didn't match the shapes of the trees. I could see the edges of the road, barely, but the world beyond it disappeared. The fields melted into gray nothing, the trees losing their shape, becoming dark smears that swayed as if breathing. I gripped the wheel tighter. My pulse hammered in my ears. The air felt cold, damp, and heavy, almost solid. Every breath I drew seemed to pull in pieces of the fog itself, and with it the faintest, almost imperceptible sounds. At first I thought it was the wind rustling the trees, but then I realized they weren't the wind. Whispers, soft, faint, just at the edge of hearing. Low voices that seemed to drift from every direction at once. I couldn't make out words, not really, but they had intent, deliberate, patient, like they were circling me, pressing against the car windows, leaning in close to my ears. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Fatigue, stress, the leftover tension from the last calls. It had to be. "Hello?" I said aloud, voice trembling slightly. The car swallowed the sound. Nothing answered. Just the whispering, curling around the frame of the vehicle like smoke. I tried the radio, hoping for dispatch, hoping for some connection to the outside world. Static. High-pitched whine, then silence. My phone? Dead. Nothing worked. The fog had trapped me. I realized it slowly, as one realizes a nightmare is more than a dream. This wasn't natural. Not ordinary. The fog moved with the car, closing in when I tried to push forward, swirling in unpredictable patterns that disoriented me. The road ahead vanished. Every turn I made led only deeper into white nothing. I kept my eyes on the road, though it hardly mattered. Every shadow at the edge of my headlights seemed alive. Branches reached farther than they should. Trees leaned closer, blackened outlines pressing in. I blinked, trying to keep my focus, and when I looked again, a figure stood on the roadside. A man. Still. Silent. Watching. The fog swallowed him the moment I tried to get a closer look. Gone. No footprints. No rustling in the leaves. Just gone. I exhaled sharply. My chest burned. "This isn't real," I whispered. "This isn't real. It's just fog. It's just fog." But saying it didn't help. The whispers grew louder, as though hearing my denial made them bolder. I could feel them pressing in, brushing against my ears, tugging at my thoughts. The car's engine hummed steadily, but the fog distorted the sound. It seemed quieter, then louder, as if the mist itself controlled how the world reached me. I could barely see a few feet ahead. Every attempt to drive faster only made the headlights scatter more, illuminating fragments of twisted trees, the empty grayness of fields, and shadows that didn't belong. I tried to turn around, to retrace my route, but the road seemed to have vanished. Or maybe it never existed in the way I remembered. Every turn led me deeper, further away from the patrol route I knew, and closer to a place that seemed alive with its own intent. The fog moved like it had a mind. It shifted, thickened, and wrapped around the car, soft but unyielding, and the whispers. Always the whispers. They were patient, deliberate, circling me. I swear I could hear shapes forming in them, words unspoken but understood. A warning, a promise, a presence that belonged to the fog, not the world outside it. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the tires, the steering, the familiar lines of the road, but I couldn't. My mind kept trying to process what I couldn't see. Then I heard footsteps, slow, careful around the car. I spun the wheel, my heart hammering, but the tires only dug into the gravel as the fog pressed closer. The sound wasn't outside. It was all around me, surrounding me, moving with me, though nothing was visible. I couldn't tell if it was real or if the fog itself was mocking me, turning my fear into sound. I reached for the radio again, static, high-pitched whine, then a faint click, like someone else trying to speak through it. I held my breath, listening. The voice was distant, distorted, almost familiar. "You shouldn't be here," it said. The words froze me. Not just the content, but the familiarity. It sounded like a voice I knew, though I couldn't place it. My own, someone from my past? The fog, I realized, wasn't just physical. It was psychological. It played tricks. It reached inside, tugging at memory, at fear, at guilt, and I felt small. Trapped. Exposed. I gripped the wheel tighter. My knuckles whitened. The fog swirled faster, pressing in, and I could see shapes moving just beyond the headlights. Shadows that didn't match the trees. Figures that dissolved when I tried to focus. I blinked. The shapes multiplied, mirrored in every corner of the fog. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the world itself had gone soft and fluid. A sudden movement caught my eye. To my left, a dark shape rose from the fog, tall and thin, then fell back into nothing. My heart raced. My breath came shallow and fast. I wanted to scream, to rev the engine, to leave, but the tires barely moved. The fog held me. Every instinct told me to keep moving, but the world outside had stopped obeying. I realized with a sinking clarity that the fog didn't want me to escape. It wanted my attention. It wanted me to see, to listen, to understand. The whispers became clearer, forming words I almost recognized, though they didn't belong to any language I knew. They tugged at my memory, at things I had buried, names I had forgotten, places I had never been, things I had never seen, and I felt myself unraveling piece by piece. I tried to focus on the road, on the car, on anything that was solid. My fingers clutched the wheel, my knuckles aching. I could see the outline of the trees, the faint curve of the asphalt, but it was like looking through water. Everything shifted when I moved my eyes, when I tried to take it all in. The fog responded to me, bending, twisting, always keeping me off balance. Minutes, hours, or maybe seconds, I had no sense of time, passed. The whispers grew, layered now, a chorus of unseen voices. I could feel their weight pressing on me, climbing into my chest, into my mind. I tried to start the engine again, to accelerate, but it hummed, steady, slow, nothing more. The fog didn't yield. And then, out of the haze, a figure appeared directly in front of the car. A man? A shadow? I couldn't tell. He, or it, stood perfectly still, facing me. I hit the brakes. The car skidded slightly, tires slipping on the damp road. The figure didn't move, didn't react. My pulse surged. My hands shook. I could feel it, a presence not human, not natural. The whispers crescendoed, as if exulting in my terror. I blinked, and it was gone. Nothing remained but fog, dense and swirling, pressing closer, curling around the car. The road ahead was just gray emptiness. No figure, no trees, nothing I could identify. And yet the memory of it remained, sharper than anything physical, carved into my mind. I gripped the wheel, heart pounding. I forced myself to breathe. Step by step, inch by inch, I moved forward. The fog loosened slightly, allowing me to see the edges of the road. But I knew better. The world had changed. The whispers had left an imprint. The presence of whatever had been there lingered, patient, deliberate. I survived the night. The car eventually emerged from the fog, the fields and trees returning to their familiar forms. The whispers faded. The air lightened. But the memory, the fog's memory, never left me. It's with me every time I drive at night, every time I hear wind in the trees, every time shadows seem too deep. That night, the fog swallowed me, and even though I escaped, it continues to watch, to whisper, to wait. I thought I had escaped. I really did. After hours that felt like days, I had finally driven through the fog, past the vanishing houses, and away from the impossible roads. The trees returned to their normal shapes. The asphalt stretched ahead without bends that shouldn't exist. The air no longer felt like it had weight pressing in on me. My hands unclenched the wheel, trembling as I exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. I had survived. At least I thought I had. I shouldn't have turned around. But the road ahead curved sharply, and I needed to double-check the route back to the main highway. I told myself it was just habit, routine, just making sure I wasn't missing anything. I eased the car forward, eyes scanning for the familiar signs of County Route 14. That's when I noticed it. The first sign, a mailbox, leaning, old, weathered, with the name Morrow carved into it. My stomach dropped. I had passed this before. I knew I had. I slowed the car, fingers tightening around the wheel again. The fields looked different somehow. The trees leaned in the same way they had before. And ahead, the asphalt stretched in a curve I recognized. I was back at the wrong turn. Impossible. It shouldn't have been possible. I hadn't made any turns that could have looped me back here. The fog was gone. The road was clear. But everything around me, every tree, every field, every crooked fence, was the same as it had been the first night. The houses, the land, the bends in the road, it all remembered me. My pulse spiked. I wanted to reverse, to drive away in the other direction, but the instinct to move forward faltered. The road ahead seemed endless, repeating. I could see the outline of the asphalt curling in the same way I had seen it before. The same crooked tree, the same leaning mailbox, the same empty field beyond. I tried to reason it out. Maybe fatigue, maybe hallucination, maybe the stress had warped my memory. But my gut knew better. Something was wrong. Something about this land, this road, this stretch of asphalt was impossible. It had trapped me. And no matter how far I thought I had gone, no matter how fast I had driven, it had brought me back here. I drove on cautiously, desperate to escape. Every instinct screamed at me to put distance between myself and this loop. But the road didn't respond as it should. Every familiar bend came again. Every empty field looked identical. Every tree leaned in the same way. It was as if I were caught in a mirror that refused to reflect the outside world. I tried to stop the car, to leave it and walk, but the asphalt stretched endlessly in both directions. The fields and trees seemed to bend slightly, subtly, guiding me back along the path I had already traveled. And somewhere deep in the back of my mind, a voice, soft, patient, impossibly calm, whispered that this was the way it wanted me. That the road itself had decided. I glanced at the passenger seat, expecting to see the hitchhiker, or maybe the fog, or the houses, or something to explain what was happening. But there was nothing. Only empty space. Only the faint chill of night pressing in through the windows. And yet I could feel the memory of those impossible nights pressing against me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. That I had never been alone. Every turn brought another flash of familiarity. A broken fence I had passed before, a shadow flitting at the edge of the headlights, a tree bent at an unnatural angle, black against the sky. I blinked, trying to focus. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. It had to be. I was exhausted, terrified, and alone. I was a rookie on a long, lonely patrol. Logic had to survive somewhere in the chaos. But logic failed me. I tried to drive faster, to break the loop, but the road didn't cooperate. Every acceleration led me back to the same curves. Every turn doubled the sense of repetition. It was as though the land itself was breathing, reshaping, watching. My headlights cut through darkness, but the edges of the road blurred, stretched, and shifted. I could see the shadows leaning closer, waiting, patient, deliberate. I felt the rising panic, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I told myself to calm down, to focus, to drive steadily, to keep my eyes on the lines of the asphalt. But every glance to the sides reminded me that the land was wrong. That the houses, the trees, the fences, they remembered. They remembered me. And somehow, somewhere, they were guiding me. Back to the beginning. Back to the start I thought I had escaped. I tried to call dispatch. The radio hummed, static. My phone? Dead. No signal. Nothing. The world outside this car had disappeared. I was alone. Completely alone. Except for the road, and the memory of the impossible nights, and the creeping awareness that I might never leave. The first hints of despair settled in. A realization that I couldn't measure time. I couldn't measure distance. The road didn't behave like it should. It didn't care about maps or logic or my understanding of the world. Every moment I spent trying to escape only ensured I remained trapped, repeating the same night over and over, following the same curves, seeing the same impossible forms. I thought about turning back. Maybe retracing the loop would help. Maybe it would give me some clue. But I knew it would be useless. The road didn't allow backtracking. The loop was complete. I tried once, reluctantly, turning the wheel to head back the way I had come. Instantly, the asphalt shifted again. The trees leaned differently. The fields rolled like they had never been touched. I was back at the same starting point. Panic surged fully now. My hands shook on the wheel. My chest tightened. The headlights illuminated the leaning mailbox, the crooked trees, the empty field. I had been here before, and I would be here again. The land had claimed me. The sense of endless looping brought a new kind of dread. Not immediate danger. Not something physical. Something existential. The knowledge that no matter how far I drove, no matter how fast, no matter how carefully, I could never truly escape. I could never leave. The road had become its own entity, and I was now a part of it, trapped in the rhythm of curves, shadows, and impossibilities. I drove forward anyway. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to abandon the car, to run into the fields, but every part of me knew it would be pointless. The land would correct itself. The loop would continue. I would be here again, staring at the same signs, the same shadows, the same impossible stretches of asphalt. The dread was suffocating. It wasn't fear of death, exactly. It was fear of repetition, of isolation, of being caught in a world that didn't obey the rules I had learned to trust. The patrol car, the headlights, even my own body, all of it felt insignificant compared to the land itself. Patient, waiting, watching, deliberate, and yet as I drove, I couldn't stop. Even in despair, I was compelled forward, to see, to survive, to acknowledge the road's memory, to follow the loop. Every curve, every shadow, every impossible bend reminded me that I was being tested, observed. The land itself had become a presence, conscious and deliberate, and I was trapped in its gaze. I thought about the nights before. The fog, the vanishing houses, the hitchhiker who had known too much. They all felt connected now, pieces of the same impossible puzzle. And I realized with a chilling clarity that the loop was not random. The land remembered, and it remembered me. And it would not let me leave until it had finished. Hours, or maybe days, I couldn't tell, passed in a haze of asphalt, shadows, and repetition. I knew the loop would continue. I knew that even if I tried every route, every escape, the same starting point awaited. And as the headlights cut through the darkness, revealing the same leaning mailbox, the same crooked tree, the same endless fields, a new fear settled in. The knowledge that I might never find the way out, that the road had claimed me completely. and that the land itself was patient enough to wait until I forgot everything else. I drove on. It was the kind of night where the forest feels alive, like it's breathing just beyond the edge of the road. The radio crackled, breaking the silence of my patrol, and I caught the call almost by accident. Unit 12, report of a missing child near Dry Creek, dispatch said. The voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the tension underneath. The creek runs through thick woods, miles from the nearest houses, and at night, the trees swallow everything, even sound, even light. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Missing child calls were routine, but this one carried a weight I couldn't explain. A feeling in my chest, cold and insistent, that something was off. Not just that the child was missing, but that the woods themselves were aware, watching, waiting. I drove toward the creek, headlights cutting through the dark. The road narrow, bordered by trees that arched like ribs over the asphalt. The air was damp, earthy, carrying the faint smell of water and decaying leaves. I kept the radio on, but there was no further information. Only my own breathing and the hum of the engine. As I approached the creek, the forest seemed to close in. The trees grew taller, denser, their branches forming dark shadows that stretched across the road. I slowed to a crawl, scanning the edges of the woods. Something moved in the corner of my vision. Quick, too fast to identify. A fox? A raccoon? Maybe. But my gut told me it wasn't. I parked at the edge of the trail leading into the forest. The creek was only a few hundred feet ahead, but the darkness swallowed it completely. I stepped out of the car, flashlight in hand, and felt the damp chill seep through my uniform. The beam of light barely penetrated the shadows. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary quiet of the night, but something thicker, heavier. The kind of silence that presses in on you, makes your ears ring. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Hello?" I called softly, my voice bouncing between the trees. The creek gurgled faintly in response, but I could swear I heard something else. A low murmur, almost like words, twisting and curling in the darkness. I shook my head. My mind was playing tricks. I followed the trail along the creek, flashlight sweeping across roots and rocks. The ground was uneven, slick from the moisture, and every step made a soft, squelching sound. I told myself to focus on the facts. A missing child. Probably wandered off, got scared, maybe hid somewhere. Simple. Nothing supernatural. But then I saw footprints. Small ones, pressed into the mud at the water's edge. Bare, fresh. I froze. My pulse quickened. I knelt to examine them, tracing the outline with my gloved hand. The prints led into the trees, then vanished. Not faded, not obscured by leaves or water. They just stopped, like whoever made them had disappeared into the forest itself. A shiver ran down my spine. I stood slowly, scanning the trees. The air felt charged, heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. The shadows seemed darker here, thicker, pressing closer. I wanted to turn back to call for backup, but the voice in my gut, cold, insistent, told me to move forward. I stepped deeper into the forest. The creek's gurgle faded, replaced by an almost imperceptible whispering. Leaves rustled as though something unseen was moving through them. Every branch that snapped underfoot sounded louder than it should. My flashlight caught glimpses of shapes, fleeting, twisted. A stump, a fallen branch, or something else. I couldn't tell. I tried to stay rational. Missing children often wander, often get scared and hide. But as I pressed on, a creeping feeling settled over me. The forest didn't just surround me, it watched. It followed. I could feel it shifting, bending, the shadows moving just beyond the reach of the light. A sudden movement to my left made me spin the flashlight. Nothing. Only a tangle of roots and darkened leaves. But I felt it, the sensation of eyes on me waiting. And then faintly I heard the laughter, high-pitched, almost a giggle. Not a child's. Too fleeting, too hollow. "Hello?" I whispered again, voice tighter this time. The laughter stopped. The forest fell silent. The shadows stretched unnaturally. I realized with a cold certainty that I wasn't following the child anymore. Something else had noticed me. Something that wanted me here. I pressed on, heart hammering. The footprints reappeared, deeper into the forest. Again, small, bare, pressed into the mud, then vanishing as abruptly as before. My flashlight flickered. The trees leaned in closer, branches brushing my shoulders, the canopy blotting out any trace of sky. I felt disoriented. Time stretched. Each step seemed longer, heavier, and then I heard it clearly, a whisper, soft, deliberate, almost inside my head. "Don't leave," I froze. My breath came in shallow gasps. I shined the flashlight around frantically. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. But the whisper persisted, repeating, circling, curling in the darkness. "Don't leave. Don't leave. Don't leave!" Panic clawed at me. My training told me to retreat, call for backup, maintain control. But my instincts screamed the opposite. The forest had me, the trees had me, and the trail. The trail was guiding me somewhere I didn't want to go. I followed the footprints again. The whispering grew as if urging me forward, not threatening, but insistent. My mind struggled to reconcile reality with perception. This wasn't logical. This wasn't normal, but it was happening. I could feel it. The creek appeared again, faintly, water glinting in my flashlight. And there, across the bank, I saw it. Not the child. Something taller, thin, shadows where there shouldn't be. The figure didn't move, just stood perfectly still watching. The forest held its breath around it. I wanted to run, to turn and sprint back to the car. But my legs felt rooted. The whispers rose again, curling around my ears, urging me forward. The figure remained, silent, patient, impossible. I took another step. And then the footprints reappeared, leading straight toward the figure. Bare, fresh, vanishing where the figure stood. My stomach dropped. Whoever or whatever it was, it had been waiting. Waiting for me to follow. Waiting for me to see. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. My mind raced. How could this be? How could a child's disappearance lead to this? To the forest itself bending around me, shaping reality, twisting perception. I took another cautious step. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my skin. The trees leaned closer. The shadows thickened. And the whispers became words, intelligible now, repeating the same command. Stay, stay, stay. My flashlight flickered again, and the figure vanished. Nothing remained but the dark forest and the trail of footprints leading nowhere. My heart pounded. I was alone, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The forest, the figure, the whispers, they were all watching, waiting. I forced myself to step back, to retrace the trail, to return to the creek and the patrol car. But the footprints didn't lead back. They had disappeared. Only mud, leaves, and darkness remained. The whispering continued, circling, patient, deliberate. Stay, I ran. Branches whipped at my face, roots snagged my boots. The creek was barely visible now, distorted by the darkness and the impossible density of the trees. My flashlight flickered erratically, shadows dancing wildly. Every sound seemed magnified. The gurgle of the creek, the rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of voices just beyond comprehension. Finally, I broke through the trees and reached the patrol car. I slammed the door, locked it, and fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back. Not at the trees. Not at the creek. Not at the impossible dark. But even now, when I drive past forests at night, I feel it. The weight of eyes, the pull of shadows, the whispering of the trees. Dry Creek wasn't just a place. It wasn't just a missing child call. It was a warning, a memory, and I know deep down that it will call again, because some places don't forget, and some things in the woods, they wait. I didn't want to go back into the woods. Even in daylight, the shadows of Dry Creek lingered in my mind, clawing at my thoughts. But the call wasn't over. Dispatch had received another tip. A local resident saying they'd seen strange things along the edge of the forest near the creek. Toys, hanging in the trees. Arranged, they said, like someone, or something, was trying to send a message. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I parked along the narrow path leading to the forest. My flashlight rested on the passenger seat, its beam already begging to be used. The trees loomed taller here, thick and unyielding, their branches forming arches that blocked the sky. A breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying the damp smell of earth and decaying foliage. The first toy appeared just a few steps into the trail. A small stuffed rabbit, its fur gray and matted, dangling from a branch by a frayed string. Its button eyes glinted faintly in the flashlight's beam. I froze. My stomach turned. It shouldn't have been there. It didn't belong. And then I saw the next. A miniature plastic doll suspended by its neck from another branch, hair tangled and eyes wide, staring blankly at me. My pulse quickened. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep moving. Footsteps soft against wet leaves, scanning the trees as I went deeper. The toys became more numerous. Ragged bears, cracked action figures, dolls missing limbs, all hanging from branches at different heights. Some were tied with rope, others with twine. Some simply draped over limbs, balanced in ways that should have made them fall but didn't. The patterns were unsettling. Circular, spiral, lines that seemed deliberate, not random. Someone had arranged these. I crouched slightly, inspecting the ground. No footprints, nothing leading to or from the toys. The forest seemed undisturbed, silent but for the creak of branches swaying in the breeze. My training told me to look for evidence, to document, to call for backup. But my mind struggled to rationalize what I saw. The toys weren't simply abandoned. They were staged, deliberate. And whoever or whatever did this wanted me to see. The farther I walked, the denser the arrangement became. Small stuffed animals dangled in clusters from low branches, forming shapes that looked almost like letters or symbols. Dolls with eyes gouged out stared blankly in my direction, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was observing, waiting for my reaction. Every shadow felt alive. Every rustle in the leaves sounded like a whisper just beyond comprehension. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to focus. Evidence, rational thought. Someone might have hung these toys as a prank, or worse, to frighten. My mind tried to normalize it, but every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. Very wrong. The air felt heavier here, thicker, pressing in on me. Even the sunlight filtering through the canopy seemed muted, grayed. I followed a faint trail between the trees, careful not to touch anything. Each toy I passed seemed to mock me silently, their eyes empty yet accusing. The spiraling patterns of the hanging figures led me to a small clearing. And there, in the center, was the most disturbing sight of all. A circle of toys, arranged meticulously, facing inward. Dolls, stuffed animals, even a tiny tricycle propped upright on its rear wheels. Some of the toys had markings carved into them, scratches that looked deliberate, like crude symbols. The ground inside the circle was bare, mud pressed smooth as though someone had walked carefully, tracing the circle over and over. I took a step closer, flashlight trembling in my hand. A cold sweat ran down my spine. The circle seemed alive. Not moving, not in the literal sense, but I felt it pulsate with intent, like it was waiting, expecting. I forced my mind to focus on the evidence, photos, notes, patterns. But even as I raised my camera, I realized the forest had grown quieter, too quiet. The breeze had stopped. The leaves no longer rustled. Only the faint, almost imperceptible creak of rope against branches reached my ears. Then I heard it. A whisper, low and deliberate, curling through the trees. I froze, heart hammering. My flashlight beam darted across the clearing, trying to catch the source, but there was nothing. Just toys, mud, and the shadows between the trees. The whisper repeated, faint but unmistakable. Look closer. See what is missing. I swallowed hard, stepping into the circle. My boots sank slightly into the mud. The toys loomed around me, each one silent. Yet they seemed to press inward, closer, as if the air itself were guiding me. And then I noticed the pattern. A small doll had been removed from the circle. Not obvious at first, but the spacing was wrong. My stomach lurched. Someone had been here very recently. I shined the flashlight into the trees beyond the circle. Movement flickered, impossible to track. A shadow darted between trunks faster than any human could move without making sound. I spun, trying to catch it, but the forest remained still again. The whispering returned, faint, like it was coming from inside my head. Don't leave. Stay. Panic started to rise. I forced myself to focus. Rational thought. The child. This call was about a missing child. Not shadows, not whispers. I forced my eyes to the ground again, scanning for footprints, broken twigs, anything that could indicate direction. And that's when I saw them. Tiny bare footprints pressed into the mud, small, careful, leading from the clearing deeper into the forest. I swallowed hard. Following them felt wrong. Every instinct screamed to retreat, and yet something compelled me forward. Curiosity, duty, fear, it didn't matter. I stepped carefully along the path of footprints, flashlight sweeping the underbrush, revealing more hanging toys along the way. Dolls with missing limbs, bears missing eyes, small tricycles overturned, balanced in ways that defied gravity. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but still unintelligible. Only feeling, only pressure. The sense of being watched. The forest seemed to lean closer, shadows thickening, leaves brushing my shoulders even though there was no wind. My pulse raced. I tried to remind myself this is a call. A missing child. Evidence. Don't get lost in imagination. The footprints eventually led to a slight rise in the land. A small hill, barely noticeable. At the top, a final arrangement awaited. The toys were clustered more tightly here, forming shapes that resembled human figures. Small silhouettes made entirely of stuffed animals and dolls. In the center, a single doll lay on the ground, staring upward, its face cracked, a single glassy eye reflecting my flashlight. And that's when I heard it clearly. A giggle. Small, high-pitched, human. Too close, behind me. I spun, flashlight sweeping the trees, but there was nothing. Just shadows, just branches. Just toys swaying slightly, as if someone or something had brushed past them. I stepped back slowly, heart hammering, eyes darting around. The air felt thick, oppressive, alive. The forest itself seemed to breathe, waiting. I had come here looking for a missing child. Instead, I found a message, a warning. Something in this forest did not like to be observed. Something that made the trees themselves seem complicit. I turned toward the trail, trying to calm my breathing, to force rational thought. The toys swung gently in the breeze that had returned, each one silent yet somehow accusatory. I felt the weight of their eyes on me as I backed away, leaving the circle behind. My mind raced, wondering who or what had made this arrangement. A human? Possibly. But the precision, the silence, the way the forest itself seemed aware. I doubted it. By the time I reached the patrol car, the sun had begun to break through the trees, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. I locked the doors and sat inside, trying to steady my breath. The forest behind me seemed calm again, normal. But I knew better. I knew that whatever had been watching, whatever had staged the toys was still there, patient, deliberate, waiting. Even now, I can see the patterns in my mind's eye. The spirals, the circles, the small figures of dolls and bears, arranged in ways that make no sense unless the forest itself is speaking, and I am the only one left to listen. And I know that one day the call will come again, because some places never forget. And some messages are meant to be discovered, slowly. I told myself I was imagining it. That my mind, frayed from long nights on patrol and the tension of the Dry Creek case, was playing tricks. But the voice came again, soft, urgent, trembling in the trees around me. Help. Help me. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound seemed impossibly close, yet when I swung the beam through the dense underbrush, there was nothing. Just the trees, the fallen leaves, and the creek running faintly somewhere beyond the shadows. My pulse pounded so hard I thought it would break through my chest. I called out, voice sharp and panicked. "Who's there? Where are you?" The voice responded almost immediately, and my stomach dropped. Not from relief, but from something deeper, colder. It wasn't far. It was inside the forest, circling, elusive, clear, a child, small, fragile, and terrified. "Please, help me?" I started forward, stepping carefully over roots and slick mud. Every step I took seemed amplified in the quiet, and the flashlight's beam cut jagged shapes from the darkness. The voice led me deeper, pulling me past familiar spots I'd already searched. My mind knew this was a loop, a repetition, but my instincts refused to listen. Someone or something was in trouble. I had to find them. Branches snagged my jacket, scratched at my hands and face. The forest grew denser. Shadows thickened, shifting as if they were moving independently of the light. The voice continued, sometimes directly behind me, sometimes ahead, sometimes faint and almost teasing, like it knew I would follow. I stopped, heart racing, chest tight. My breath fogged in the cold air. "Show yourself," I demanded, voice cracking despite my best efforts. "Where are you?" No answer. Only the faint gurgle of the creek and the whispering of leaves. Then, from somewhere above, a soft giggle, too high-pitched to be natural. I spun, flashlight sweeping the canopy, and my stomach twisted. Shadows coalesced between the branches, forming shapes that weren't quite solid. My rational mind tried to label them: branches, leaves, shadows. But every instinct screamed they were alive, watching, waiting. I forced myself to focus. Evidence, procedures, step by step. Follow the sound, keep sightlines clear. But as I moved, the voice shifted again, always slightly out of reach, never revealing itself fully. "Help me." Closer, behind me. I froze again. The forest seemed to tighten around me, pressing in, bending reality. I turned in a full circle, flashlight sweeping the underbrush. No child, no movement other than shadows. Yet the voice persisted, pleading, impossible to ignore. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Follow the trail. Look for footprints. Look for signs, rationality, logic. The voice grew louder, more insistent, and my hands shook as I moved deeper into the clearing. The ground was soft, mud giving under my boots. Every squelch echoed unnaturally, amplified by the oppressive silence around me, and then I saw it. A small scarf, draped over a branch, fluttering faintly in a breeze I couldn't feel. I recognized it immediately. Missing children often leave clues behind, even accidentally. I approached slowly, eyes darting through the trees. Nothing moved, yet the forest felt alive with intent. I could almost feel eyes on me, countless unseen presences observing my every step. "Please, help me!" It was behind me again. I spun. Nothing. Only trees. Only shadows. Only my own racing heartbeat. Paranoia clawed at me. Every direction I turned, the voice moved. Always close enough to be real, far enough to be untouchable. My mind screamed that this was impossible, but I couldn't deny it. I could hear it. I tried to reason. Perhaps a lost hiker's child. Perhaps an echo. Perhaps the wind. Anything but what my gut was telling me. Something unnatural lingered here. The forest itself seemed to bend around me, shaping sound, shadows, even perception. The voice wasn't just calling. It was guiding, manipulating, testing. I followed the sound cautiously, scanning the trees, listening to every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves. The voice led me past familiar markers. The old hollowed tree, the cluster of moss-covered rocks, the steep bank above the creek. Each step drew me deeper into the forest, farther from the road, farther from reality. Then I heard it clearly, directly beside me. Whispered in my ear, impossibly close, yet nothing touched me. "Over here." I spun again, flashlight swinging, chest heaving. No one, no child. Only the trees and shadows that bent and twisted unnaturally. The whisper lingered in my ears, curling into my skull. "Over here. Over here." Panic surged fully now. My hands shook uncontrollably. I could feel the sweat on my forehead, cold against the chill of the forest. My flashlight flickered, shadows stretching long and wrong, shapes that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. And yet, the voice continued, patient, deliberate, insistent. I stumbled over a root, cursing under my breath, flashlight bouncing wildly. My eyes caught a flicker in the trees. A movement? Another shadow? The mind wants to rationalize it. A squirrel, a bird, the light playing tricks. But this wasn't tricks. This wasn't natural. I could feel it. The forest had turned against me. Or perhaps it had always been like this, waiting for someone to enter. The voice called again. Softer now, pleading, almost desperate. "Please, don't leave me." My breath caught. The words were deliberate, personal, almost familiar. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn back, to sprint blindly to the road. But the voice, weak, fragile, held me in place. Curiosity, duty, fear, all of it anchored me in the mud and shadows. I forced myself to look for tangible evidence, footprints, clothing, anything. But the forest offered nothing. The ground was soft, trampled in places, but no clear signs. The creek flowed silently somewhere nearby, and beyond it, trees pressed in endlessly. The shadows were alive, moving subtly with my flashlight, bending as if they were aware of me, aware of the voice. I called again, more firmly. "Child, show yourself. I'm here to help!" The response came from every direction at once. A chorus of whispers, small and delicate, circling, curling into my head. "Here. Here. Over here." I whirled, scanning the forest, flashlight shaking. My mind faltered. The trees leaned closer. The shadows thickened unnaturally. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to run, to leave this place entirely. Yet the voice, fragile and pleading, held me there, tugging at my heart, tugging at something primal. And then I understood. I wasn't just hearing the child. I was hearing the forest, the shadows, the lingering weight of all the missing, the abandoned, the lost. The voice had been crafted, shaped, carried by the trees themselves. And now it had me. I stumbled forward, flashlight bouncing, eyes darting across impossible shadows. Shapes coalesced briefly, a small figure, frail, pale, staring with hollow eyes. I lunged, heart hammering, only for the figure to vanish. Gone. Nothing remained but the hush of the forest, the soft sway of branches, and the whispering in my ears. "Don't leave. Stay!" I backed up slowly, mind racing, realizing that the forest wasn't natural. It wasn't just trees, creek, and mud. It had intent. It observed. It manipulated. And I had become part of it, trapped in the sound of a voice that wasn't real, or wasn't entirely human. I returned to the edge of the trail, chest heaving, sweat cooling rapidly on my skin. The creek whispered faintly beyond the trees. Sunlight struggled through the canopy, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. And yet, even at the trail's edge, the voice lingered in my head. "Stay! Help me! Don't leave." I know I should have left. I know I should have driven back to the station, but every time I close my eyes, I hear it. Not a call. Not a sound. Not a voice from the physical world. It exists only in memory, in imagination, in the spaces between. The forest gave it shape. The shadows gave it presence. And I am left with the understanding that some voices are never meant to be answered, only endured. Because some calls never end. I shouldn't have gone back. Even after the whispers, the hanging toys, the voices that weren't there, my training pulled me in. The creek. Dry Creek. It called to me in a way I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was the missing child, that someone needed help. But as I walked along the muddy banks, I felt something deeper, something alive in the water. Something patient and deliberate, waiting for me to look. The sun was low, sinking behind the thick canopy of trees. The light barely touched the surface of the creek, leaving long shadows that twisted and shifted like they were breathing. My flashlight bounced across rocks and branches as I moved closer, but the reflection of the sky, the trees, the muddy water itself, it began to distort in ways that made my stomach lurch. And then I saw him, a small figure standing at the edge of the creek, reflected perfectly in the still water. A boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide and terrified. He stared directly at me, lips moving silently. I couldn't hear words, but the sense of pleading was unmistakable. My pulse hammered in my ears. I knelt, reaching out, trying to see him clearly, to understand how he could be standing there when the banks were empty. I stepped closer. The reflection shifted. Just as I approached, the boy vanished. The water rippled faintly, distorting everything, but there was no child, no footprints in the mud, no sign of recent presence except the lingering impression in my mind. My hands shook, gripping the flashlight so tightly the knuckles whitened. The creek was just a creek again, calm, still, silent. I whispered his name even though I didn't know it. "Hey, it's okay." "I'm here. Come on, buddy." My voice sounded small, swallowed by the forest. The reflection reappeared, but not in the same place. A fleeting shimmer in the water, a flash of dark hair and wide eyes. He was there, just beyond my reach. And the deeper I leaned, the more he slipped away. I tried to rationalize it. Fatigue, stress, the forest playing tricks. The light catching mud and water at strange angles. Maybe all of it was my mind. But the terror in the boy's eyes, that was real. My gut told me that, and something about the stillness of the water. The way the reflection stayed just long enough to notice, then dissolved. It wasn't natural. I sank to my knees at the water's edge, shining the flashlight across the surface. Every ripple seemed deliberate, a pulse in time with my own heartbeat. My reflection wavered. Then the boys appeared again, closer this time. He wasn't standing on the bank. He was beneath the surface, staring up, expression frozen in fear. His lips moved again, whispering words I couldn't hear, but the plea was clear. I reached into the water, fingertips grazing the surface. The reflection shattered like glass, ripples racing across the creek, and he was gone again. Cold ran through my veins. The forest pressed in around me, leaves rustling in a wind I couldn't feel. The sun dipped lower, the shadows deepening, and I realized I had been kneeling there for what felt like hours, staring into a creek that offered no answers, only questions. I pulled myself to my feet, breathing hard, wiping mud from my hands. My flashlight flickered. Every instinct told me to leave, to run back to the patrol car, to never come back. But the voice of the child lingered in my mind, insistent, not audible but undeniable. A memory, an echo, a call. The reflection returned again, farther downstream. I ran, tripping over roots, slipping in mud, desperate to reach it. The boy's image followed the curve of the creek, always just out of reach. I called his name, yelled, but the forest swallowed my voice. Shadows leaned closer, tree trunks bending as if to guide me, or maybe trap me. I couldn't tell which. At one point, the water's surface went still. I paused, flashlight trembling. The boy appeared again, close enough that I could see the fear etched on his face. But when I leaned forward, ready to reach out, my reflection merged with his. For a moment, I saw myself in his place, smaller, terrified, lost. I stumbled back, gasping, and the reflection dissolved once more. I sank to the ground, mud cold beneath my knees, trying to calm my shaking hands. My training, my experience, my reason, they all screamed that I was hallucinating. That this was stress, isolation, imagination, but my instincts, the ones I'd learned to trust over every call, every night shift, told me this was something else. Something deliberate, something that existed in the water, in the shadows, in the gaps between reality and perception. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the creek. The boy's reflection appeared sporadically, fleeting as though teasing me. I could feel a pulse, subtle, like the water was alive. Every time I blinked, he was closer. And every time I moved, he shifted farther. A cruel game. A test. I remembered the other nights, the toys, the voices, the whispers. The forest had been patient, observant, waiting. And now even the creek was complicit, reflecting not just reality, but something beyond it. My chest tightened. Fear pressed against my ribs. I had never felt so powerless, so manipulated by something I couldn't see. The forest seemed to close in. Shadows thickened. Every tree, every branch, every ripple in the creek felt like it had purpose. Watching, judging, waiting. I could almost feel the boy's gaze, urging me, guiding me, and yet impossibly distant. My mind raced. What had happened to him? Where was he? Was this forest a trap, a stage, a living presence? I reached for my radio, hoping for backup, for anyone to hear me. Nothing. Static. Then, silence. My phone? No signal. The world outside the creek had vanished. I was alone. The reflection, the boy, the forest, they were all that remained. And the deeper truth settled in my chest like ice. I had walked willingly into something I could not escape. The reflection shimmered one last time. The boy stared, mouth moving in silent desperation. I leaned closer, trembling. The water seemed to pulse under my hands, and then he was gone, dissolved into ripples, swallowed by the darkening creek, leaving nothing but mud and leaves. I sank back against a tree, breathing hard, mud smeared across my uniform. I wanted to scream, to shout at the forest, to shake some sense of reality into existence. But the forest remained patient, silent, pressing, as if my fear were exactly what it had been waiting for. Time blurred. Minutes, hours, I couldn't tell. The sun had nearly disappeared. The shadows stretched long and wrong, bending over the creek like fingers. I forced myself to stand, to leave, but every step away made the reflection shimmer in my mind. I could still see him, still hear the pleading, even without water. My memory had burned the image into me. I walked back to the trail, each step deliberate, careful not to look back. My flashlight flickered, then stabilized. The creek now appeared ordinary, calm, mundane. But I knew better. I knew that the forest, the water, the shadows, they were patient. They didn't need to act quickly. They had time. And I had left a piece of myself behind in the reflection. By the time I reached the patrol car, darkness had fully fallen. The forest behind me seemed quiet, still, normal, but I knew that any calm was temporary. The boy's face, his eyes wide and terrified, haunted me. Every night since, I see him in puddles, in the glass of the station, even in the reflection of my own eyes. Not real, not there, but present. A reminder that the forest doesn't forget, that water doesn't forget, that some things can't be saved, only observed and feared. I started the engine, gripping the wheel tightly, chest still tight with dread. The creek lay behind me, silent and unassuming, but I knew better. I knew that the reflection hadn't been the boy alone. It had been the forest. The forest had shown me a memory, a warning, a trap, and I had followed willingly. Even now, sometimes I can hear the faint splash of water, the soft ripple that doesn't match the creek, and I know he's still there. Somewhere between reflection and reality, somewhere between memory and nightmare, and I know, deep in my bones, that I'll see him again. I had been patrolling towns like this for years, but something about Meadowbrook felt different. The streets were empty, not just quiet, but unnervingly vacant. Streetlights flickered faintly, casting long, uneven shadows that stretched across cracked sidewalks and shuttered windows. It was past midnight, but even by small-town standards, the silence was heavy. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just a sleepy town. Maybe everyone was at home, asleep. Rational thoughts, my training, all screaming at me that this was normal. But the hair on the back of my neck refused to lie down. Shadows clung too long, too solid, like the darkness had weight. I drove past the town square. The fountain was dry, cracked, yet the water reflected the streetlight in ways that made the shadows around it look alive. I slowed, scanning the empty streets. No one. Nothing. Just the echo of my own tires on the asphalt and the faint hum of electricity from the few lights that still worked. I parked near the old diner at the corner, closed for years, the glass dark and grimy, but even through the window, I felt it. Eyes. Or maybe imagination. My chest tightened. The shadows inside didn't match the furniture. They moved, subtly, almost imperceptibly. I shook my head, trying to dispel it. Just a trick of the light, I muttered under my breath. I stepped out of the patrol car, boots echoing sharply in the quiet. The air was thick, humid, pressing in on me. Every time I paused, the silence seemed to grow heavier, like the town itself was listening, waiting. My flashlight cut a cone of brightness into the darkness, but the shadows beyond it remained thick, impenetrable. I started walking along the sidewalk, ears straining for the slightest sound. Nothing, no distant dogs barking, no faint hum of a refrigerator through an open window, no creak of a settling house. Just the occasional whisper of wind that didn't quite sound like wind. The kind of sound that makes you turn your head, expecting movement, expecting life, and finding none. A few houses down, I noticed something odd. A porch swing, broken and hanging crookedly, creaked gently, but there was no breeze. I froze, trying to hear anything else, anything human. Nothing. The swing moved again as if nudged by invisible hands. My heart thumped against my chest, and I forced myself to move forward, flashlight scanning every corner. I reached the intersection by the old church. Its steeple loomed over the town like a silent sentinel. Even at this distance, I could see the shadows inside, stretching unnaturally across the pews and altar. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure kneeling, head bowed. I held my breath, focusing. The figure vanished the instant I blinked, leaving only the warped shadows that seemed to pulse in the dim light. I shook my head again. My mind was starting to play tricks, I told myself. Hours of night shifts, long stretches of quiet roads, isolation. All of it. I needed evidence, observation, facts. The town wasn't alive. It wasn't watching me. It couldn't be, but the unease didn't leave. Every step I took seemed to echo in the streets. Too long, too resonant. My own presence felt amplified, magnified by the oppressive quiet. It was as though the town waited, not for life, but for acknowledgement. For someone to notice that it existed in a way that didn't follow the rules. I turned down a side street, flashlight sweeping across buildings that had been abandoned for decades. Paint peeling, windows cracked, doors hanging on rusted hinges. Yet some of the windows had curtains drawn neatly inside, and I could swear I glimpsed shapes behind them. Human shapes. Watching. Waiting. Shadows bending against the fabric in ways that made no sense. My pulse quickened. Rational thought fought with instinct. I told myself these were just old houses, the play of light, my imagination filling in gaps. But I couldn't ignore the feeling crawling along my spine. This town, it wasn't empty. Not really. Something moved in the quiet. Something that hid in plain sight, in the folds of darkness, in the spaces between the streetlights. I approached the town square again, slower this time. The fountain looked the same, cracked and dry, but the shadows surrounding it were denser. When my flashlight flicked across the stone, I could swear they shifted. A figure, a trick of the light? I couldn't tell. My chest tightened, and I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move. The silence was almost unbearable. Every tiny noise, the scrape of a loose shutter, the faint hum of electricity, my own breathing, felt magnified. I spun occasionally, shining the flashlight into every alley and doorway. Each time, the darkness recoiled, refusing to give up its secrets. And with every glance, I felt it. The town's attention on me. Not alive in the human sense. Not conscious, but aware. Like a predator watching its prey. Patient, deliberate. I passed a row of houses where lights flickered briefly in a window, then went out. My heart jumped. I stopped, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, no human presence at all. But I could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes, the brush of awareness against the edges of my perception. I kept walking, not daring to run, but aware that the moment I did, the darkness would follow. A stray cat darted across the street, too fast, too silent. Its eyes glowed briefly in the flashlight, then vanished. I exhaled shakily. Relief? Maybe. But the oppressive quiet returned immediately, settling back over the town like a living thing. I tried to remind myself it was a quiet night, a slow shift, nothing more. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the town was hiding something, that it existed in layers I couldn't comprehend, that the shadows themselves were thicker here than anywhere else I had patrolled. I continued along the main street, passing the old grocery store, the abandoned gas station, the firehouse that had been closed for years. Everything looked ordinary, almost mundane, but the silence magnified every detail. The rust on a door hinge, the broken glass underfoot, the way shadows pooled unnaturally in corners. I couldn't see anyone, but the town felt alive in a different way, and it wasn't friendly. The final block took me past the old school, its windows dark, blackened with age. I stopped at the edge of the playground. Swings hung still, the slide rusted and pitted, but in the faint glow of the flashlight, shadows seemed to gather at the edges, shapes that were just out of focus. My stomach turned. Every rational explanation, the age of the buildings, fatigue, stress, fell away. I felt watched, followed, assessed. I stepped back slowly, keeping the flashlight trained ahead. My patrol route demanded I continue, but every fiber in me wanted to leave. The streetlights flickered again, the long shadows stretching and twisting. For a moment, I thought I saw something move across the pavement. A figure. A trick of light. I couldn't be sure. My pulse was rapid, and I forced myself to focus, scanning each corner, each doorway, each patch of darkness. The town didn't offer any answers, only questions. The shadows were heavy, almost tangible. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of expectation, of observation. I could feel the weight of it pressing down, settling into my chest. Even as I returned to my patrol car, the sensation followed. The streets were still quiet, but I knew the town wasn't asleep. It was waiting. I climbed into the patrol car, locking the doors and taking a deep breath. The engine's hum was comforting, but the memory of those long, empty streets clung to me. Shadows that moved when I wasn't looking. Windows that held shapes just beyond recognition. The oppressive, deliberate quiet. It wasn't normal, and I knew deep down that Meadowbrook wasn't the first quiet town I'd patrolled that felt wrong. Some towns have life. Some towns have history. And some towns have shadows. Heavy shadows. Shadows that notice when you're alone, when you're tired, when you're vulnerable. And Meadowbrook had shadows that waited, and they would remember me. I thought last night's patrol through Meadowbrook had been unsettling. But tonight was different. The streets were quieter. The shadows longer, heavier. Even the familiar buildings, the diner, the old school, the gas station, felt alive in a way I couldn't place. My headlights cut through the darkness, but they didn't illuminate the truth. The town seemed to shift in the light, subtly, deliberately. I rounded the corner near the old bakery, a place boarded up for years. Usually it sat in shadow, dark and forgotten. But tonight, the windows flickered. Not randomly, the light pulsed faintly, like breathing. I froze, hand tightening on the wheel. A reflection? A street lamp? My brain reached for logical explanations, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I stepped out of the car, flashlight raised, scanning the row of abandoned houses. One by one, the windows blinked on and off. Not all at once, but in a sequence that felt deliberate. Watching. Waiting. My pulse quickened. I wanted to convince myself it was electrical, maybe a short in some old wiring. But these houses had no power. None. I approached the first house, boots crunching on gravel. The front door sagged on rusted hinges, paint peeling from years of neglect. I paused at the window, shining the flashlight inside. Shadows shifted in the corner, not cast by anything in the room. Just movement, just suggestion. My stomach knotted. I told myself it was my imagination, but my skin crawled. As I moved along the street, more houses joined the strange rhythm. Lights flickered, dim and inconsistent, each window blinking as though acknowledging my presence. I could feel a weight behind them, a presence that didn't belong to the air or the walls. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. Something old, patient, observing me. I called out softly, testing. "Hello, anyone here?" No answer. Only the flicker of the windows, the subtle shifting of shadows. The effect was almost like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, focused on me. I stepped closer to the next house. A small kitchen window revealed a room coated in dust and decay. And yet, in the dim light, I could see it clearly, an empty chair facing the window, as though waiting for me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus. Training, procedure, observation. I checked my radio. Dead. Nothing. No contact. The silence of the town had never felt so complete, so encompassing. And the houses. They seemed to lean toward me, framing the street like sentinels, their windows blinking, their shadows breathing. I tried to rationalize. Maybe the town's old wiring was loose. Maybe reflections from distant streetlights danced across broken glass. Anything. But the pulse, the rhythm of the flickering, it was too deliberate. I could feel it in my chest. A conversation without words, a presence without body, and it was focused on me. I moved down the street slowly, flashlight scanning. A second-story window lit briefly. Something moved. A shadow, maybe. I held my breath. Then it vanished. My heartbeat pounded so loudly I was sure it could be heard outside. But the town remained silent, except for the light, the blinking windows. Watching. Waiting. I tried to make sense of it. There were patterns. Flicker here, flicker there, pause, then a slow sweep of light across a broken floorboard. Almost like the houses were alive. Not in a conscious sense, but aware, observing, engaging. My skin prickled as I realized the fear wasn't about what I could see. It was about what I couldn't, about what existed behind the glass in the shadows waiting for me to notice. I stopped at a corner house, the largest on the block. Its windows flickered slowly, methodically. I could swear for a brief moment I saw eyes, not human eyes, but aware. Watching me, I raised my flashlight, scanning every angle. Nothing. Empty rooms. Dust motes drifting in weak beams of light. Yet the pulse continued, subtle, deliberate, like the house itself was breathing around me. I stepped back, unease clawing at me. Every instinct told me to leave, to drive away, to never look back. But curiosity, fear, and something deeper, older, rooted me in place. I couldn't turn away. The street, the houses, the shadows, they had my attention, my focus, and I realized they were feeding off it. As I moved past another house, the windows blinked in rapid succession, one after the other like a wave. My reflection caught briefly in the glass. I froze, not because of myself, but because the reflection seemed wrong. The shadows around me stretched unnaturally, bending against the glass. For a moment, I thought I saw movement behind me, a figure lingering where none could exist. I turned sharply. Nothing. Only the town, empty, silent, blinking. I tried to shake it off. My training, my experience. This was a quiet town. Abandoned houses, old wiring, fatigue, stress. But my instincts screamed at me. This was something else. Something deliberate. Something patient. Something that had been waiting for someone to notice. Someone to respond. A sound broke through the quiet. A single floorboard creaked. Behind me? Ahead? I couldn't tell. The windows flickered once, twice, and then, for a brief second, I thought I saw the house's shadows bend toward me. My flashlight wavered in my grip, but I held it firm. I moved forward, step by step, my boots crunching on gravel, eyes scanning every flicker, every movement, every shadow. The town seemed alive, and I was the intruder. Every house had awareness, every window a gaze, and as I moved down the street, I could feel a presence pressing against the edges of perception, just out of sight, just out of reach, watching, waiting. I came to the end of the block, where the streetlight buzzed faintly, illuminating a small park. The swing set hung still. The ground was dry, cracked, and yet, from the row of abandoned houses, a single window remained lit. A slow, steady blink. Watching. I could feel the weight of it pressing down. My chest tightened. The town had me. Not physically, but in every sense that mattered. My mind, my focus, my fear. I stepped back, finally, retreating toward my patrol car. Every blink of the windows seemed to follow me. Not a reflection of light. Not a trick. I could feel intent behind it. Deliberate, patient, waiting for me to understand something I didn't yet grasp. The engine hummed under my hands as I climbed in, doors locked. Headlights cut through the dark street, illuminating the houses, the shadows, the windows that blinked in slow, deliberate pulses. The town was quiet again, almost perfectly. But I knew better. I knew that quiet carried weight, and that weight was aware. I drove off slowly, but even from the moving car, I felt the town's gaze, heavy, deliberate, attentive. The windows blinked once more, and I swore, just for a moment, I saw shapes lean forward behind the glass, bending toward the street, reaching for something I couldn't name. My chest ached. My hands trembled. My mind raced. Meadowbrook wasn't asleep. Meadowbrook was waiting, and I had noticed. Word count, 352 words. I thought the streets of Meadowbrook were unsettling before, but nothing prepared me for what came next. It started when I picked up the radio, a simple check-in with dispatch, routine words that should have been mundane, but the moment I keyed the microphone, there was nothing. Just static, a low, humming static that filled the cab of the patrol car like it was solid, pressing against my ears. I frowned and tried again. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Do you copy? Nothing. Just static. I shook my head. Maybe a bad connection. The town was small, wired in ways that weren't always reliable. But the static wasn't uniform. It ebbed and pulsed, almost like breathing, almost like a voice trying to speak through it, but unable. I leaned back in my seat, trying to steady my nerves. I checked the other channels. All the same. Static, low and insistent, humming against my skull. My fingers hovered over the dials, hesitant, because there was something wrong, something deliberate about the way it sounded. The static wasn't random. It shifted with me, with the patrol car, with every movement I made, like it was aware. I stepped out of the vehicle, flashlight cutting a narrow path down the empty street. Every time I moved, the static seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. I called out, "Hello?" Anyone there? Nothing. Silence, save for the insistent hum in my ears. I tried again on the radio, desperation creeping into my voice. Unit 12 to dispatch, do you copy? Over, the static replied. Not a word, not even a sound I could interpret, but a feeling, a pressure. Someone or something was listening. I could feel it. I wasn't alone. The streets remained empty, but the static wrapped around me like a net, tightening. I climbed back into the patrol car, shaking. The radio hummed softly. I tried to think rationally. Electronics malfunctioned, interference, distance. Any explanation would have to do, because the alternative was unbearable. That static wasn't just noise. It had attention. It had intent. I reached down to check my equipment, each movement deliberate. The radio's dials twitched as if nudged by unseen fingers. My pulse hammered. I could feel eyes on me from the surrounding darkness, though I knew there was nothing. No one should be here. The houses were abandoned. The streets were empty. And yet the feeling persisted. I was being observed. I leaned forward, flashlight slicing through the night, illuminating nothing but empty streets and cracked sidewalks. Still the static pulsed. Faster now, louder, warmer somehow. Not just sound, but sensation. It pressed against my skull, against my nerves. I swallowed hard, trying to force calm, trying to remember training, trying to remind myself that nothing alive could be here, watching. Then I heard it, a faint rhythmic echo beneath the static. Not words, not language I could understand. A pattern, subtle, deliberate, like a heartbeat or a pulse. I froze. The hum of the radio matched it perfectly, a rhythm syncing with mine. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. I tried to shake it off, convinced I was imagining it. Stress, fatigue, isolation, everything combined into a nightmare of my own making. But even as I forced rational thought, I could feel it. Presence, attention. Not human, not alive in the way I knew, but aware, watching me, waiting. I stepped out again, boots crunching on gravel. Every shadow seemed thicker now, heavier, holding themselves just beyond the reach of my flashlight. And the static followed me, pulsing in rhythm with my steps. I called out again, voice shaking. Hello? Whoever's there, I'm an officer. Step out! Silence. The static only grew, a wave pressing in, and I realized I wasn't calling them. They were calling me. Not through words, not in sound, but in perception, in attention, in the way the air felt charged and heavy. The patrol car, the street, the houses, they weren't just around me. They were part of it. Part of something waiting. I backed away slowly, trying to understand, trying to make sense. Every instinct screamed to leave, to drive away, to abandon the street entirely. But the feeling of being listened to, studied, never left. I could feel its focus in the pit of my stomach. The static on the radio wasn't just noise. It was observation, a connection. I climbed back into the car, shaking. Hands pressed against the wheel, eyes scanning the street, flashlight dancing across empty houses. My mind raced. Every abandoned building, every shuttered window seemed to lean slightly toward me, shadows pooling like ink. And the radio pulsed, low, deliberate, attuned to me, as if it were a living thing. I keyed the microphone again, almost without hope. Unit 12 to dispatch, please respond, static. And a feeling, subtle at first, then stronger, a presence, watching, waiting. I couldn't tell if it was in the street, in the houses, in the radio, but I knew it was aware of me. Every move, every thought, every heartbeat. I tried to start the car. Engine turned over, headlights cutting through the darkness. But the static didn't fade. It followed me, filling the cab like an entity. Not sound, not sensation, but both. It pressed against my ears, my chest, my mind. Every instinct told me to leave, but somewhere beneath fear was curiosity. Terror mingled with fascination, pulling me toward it. I shook my head. I had to stay rational. I had to follow procedure. Patrol the streets, check the equipment, make sure nothing was wrong. But each time I touched the radio, the static pulsed faster, synchronized with my own heartbeat. And with every pulse, the awareness intensified. Something knew me. Something that wasn't human and wasn't entirely bound by this world. I left the car, flashlight in hand. Step by step, I moved down the empty streets, trying to map the sensation, trying to find the source. The static responded to my movement, louder when I slowed, softer when I ran. It was alive, responsive, attentive. I stopped in the middle of the street, scanning houses that had been empty for decades. Windows stared at me blankly. Shadows pooled and twisted, and through it all, the hum of static pulsed, synchronized, deliberate. I realized then that I wasn't hearing calls. I was receiving attention. I was the message. The static wasn't a communication. It was a focus, a tool for observation, for understanding, for tracking. And I felt every bit of it deep in my chest, as though the town itself, or whatever occupied it, had attached itself to me. I stumbled back toward the patrol car, chest tight, breathing ragged. Every shadow seemed thicker, darker, holding itself just beyond the beam of my flashlight. Every abandoned house, every flickering window seemed alive, watching, waiting. And the static, relentless pulsing, synced with my every move, my every thought. I climbed into the car, locking the doors. Engine humming, headlights illuminating the empty street. The static persisted, low, deliberate, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. Awareness without form, attention without shape. I couldn't escape it. Not here, not in this town. And I understood, with a cold certainty that gripped my stomach. The calls without voices weren't mistakes, weren't technical errors. They were deliberate. They existed to remind me, to ensure I knew that I was being watched, that someone or something knew I was here, that every thought, every heartbeat, every tremor of fear was theirs to observe. The patrol car shivered in the night, engine humming, headlights cutting through the darkness, the static filling the cab. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached, aware that leaving wouldn't erase what had begun. Something had attached itself to me, patient, waiting, persistent. I started the car, driving slowly down the empty streets. But even as I moved, the static followed, pulsing, alive, attentive, a reminder that Meadowbrook wasn't just quiet. It wasn't empty. It was aware. And now so was I. I had been patrolling Meadowbrook for hours, each street and corner more unnerving than the last. The flickering windows, the empty houses, the static on the radio, it was all bad enough. But nothing prepared me for the alley. It was a narrow, cobblestone lane I had never noticed before, wedged between the old hardware store and a shuttered bakery. The streetlights barely reached it, leaving the entrance in shadow. My patrol car's headlights caught the rough edges of the walls as I slowed, curiosity pulling me in. I stepped out of the car, flashlight cutting a path into the darkness. The air was heavier here, almost viscous, pressing against my chest. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud and insistent, competing with the hum of the car's engine behind me. The alley was narrow, and the walls closed in, peeling brick and broken signs reaching toward me like jagged teeth. I walked slowly, every step deliberate. The silence was oppressive, deeper than any street I had patrolled before. No wind, no distant hum of electricity, no creak of old boards. Just the echo of my own boots on the cobblestones, and the faint hum of awareness that seemed to emanate from the alley itself. I reached the center, flashlight scanning side to side. Nothing. Empty walls. Debris scattered on the ground, a tipped-over trash can. But something about the air felt wrong. It was thicker, more deliberate, like it had weight. I could feel it brushing against me, following, observing, and then I noticed the shadows. Not cast by anything in the alley, but moving independently, stretching, bending, almost alive. I swallowed hard. "Hello?" I called softly, testing the silence. The echo came back to me, slow and hollow, like the alley itself was speaking, but no answer followed. Just the shadows, writhing slightly at the edges of my flashlight beam. My pulse quickened. I backed toward the street, intending to mark the alley and return with backup. But when I reached the corner, it was gone. The space where it had opened, the darkness that swallowed the ground, was now solid. A wall of brick and mortar, weathered and old, as though the alley had never existed. I rubbed my eyes, disbelief searing through me. I looked down the street. The patrol car sat where I had left it, headlights illuminating nothing unusual. I ran to it, heart hammering, flashlight sweeping the area. Nothing, no alley, not a hint of where it could have been. I swore under my breath that I had walked it, scanned it, felt it pressing against me. But now, nothing. I tried to rationalize. Exhaustion, a trick of the light, stress, isolation, fatigue, all of it. But the memory of the alley, its narrow walls, the weight in the air, the shadows moving as if aware, none of that was imagination. I remembered it perfectly, and yet the physical evidence had vanished. I climbed into the patrol car, hands shaking, gripping the wheel so tightly it left marks. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I drove slowly down the street, eyes scanning every corner, every space between buildings. The alley did not return. It had disappeared completely, as though Meadowbrook had swallowed it whole. That's when the feeling hit me. Not just unease, not just fear, but the distinct sensation of being hunted. My pulse spiked, every nerve on edge. I could feel something behind me, just beyond the reach of headlights following. Not a person, not human, but awareness, intention, watching, waiting. I stopped at a familiar intersection, breath shaking in my chest. The shadows here were normal as shadows could be in this town, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time I moved, every time I glanced over my shoulder, I could sense it. Something mirrored my movements. Something knew the path I took, anticipated it. The alley wasn't gone. It had left a mark, a tether, connecting me to something that existed outside the rules of this world. I tried to calm myself, forcing rational thought. Maybe it was a street I had never noticed, a construction site, an alley that had been sealed. But the memory of walking it, of the oppressive weight, the shadows that moved independently, none of that could be explained. And the knowledge that it had vanished so completely, leaving no trace, gnawed at my mind. I started driving again, slowly, deliberately, scanning the streets. Every intersection, every corner seemed to stretch farther than it should. Perspective shifted subtly, disorienting me, like the town itself was bending. I stopped at a familiar corner, the one near the bakery where the alley had appeared. Empty street, nothing unusual. But the air was heavier, the silence more complete. And in that silence I felt it, something watching, patient, deliberate. I tried to focus on the patrol car's radio, seeking distraction. Static. The low, humming static that had followed me for hours now filled the cab again, pressing against my ears, syncing with my heartbeat. I thought about calling dispatch, asking for backup, telling someone, anyone, that the alley had vanished. But even as I reached for the microphone, I hesitated. How could I explain this? What words could capture something that didn't obey logic or physics? I left the street behind, trying to convince myself to forget it, to move on. But the feeling of being hunted grew stronger. Every turn, every streetlight, every shadow in Meadowbrook seemed alive. The alley had marked me, tethered me. I could feel it in the static, in the darkness, in the very weight of the air pressing down on me. I parked at the edge of town, hands gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The patrol car's headlights cut into the night, illuminating empty streets, familiar houses. Yet even here, the shadows shifted. Not naturally, not passively, but deliberately. Moving just slightly when I wasn't looking directly. Following, waiting. I remembered the alley, the narrow walls, the moving shadows, the sense of being enclosed and observed. I remembered the way the weight of it pressed against me, the almost tactile sensation of awareness brushing against my skin. And I knew with a chilling certainty that whatever I had encountered was not finished with me. I thought about leaving Meadowbrook, about driving far away, never returning. But even as the thought formed, the feeling of being watched intensified. Not in the streets, not in the houses, but inside me, inside my mind. The alley had left something behind, a presence, a tether, a memory that pulsed with awareness. And I could feel it tracking me, patient, deliberate, unrelenting. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead, the routine patrol, the mundane tasks. But every shadow seemed to stretch, every corner seemed to hide something just beyond perception. And in the low hum of the patrol car's engine, I could feel it. The echo of the alley, the weight, the movement of shadows. The deliberate attention. Hours later, I returned to the streets I knew well, passing the familiar houses. The old diner, the church, the school, all seemed ordinary. Yet I could still feel the alley, its vanished walls, the shadows that had followed me. It had left a mark on me, indelible and persistent. I knew deep down that it wasn't just a missing lane or a trick of memory. It was something else, something patient, something aware. And I realized, with a chill that settled deep into my bones, that it would wait for me to wander, to stray, to notice again. And the next time it would not vanish so quietly. The alley, the shadows, the presence, they were not bound by logic or space. They existed to be found, and I had found them. Even now, as I write this, hours later, the memory lingers. I can feel it in the quiet of my apartment, in the shadows that pool unnaturally in the corners of my room, in the low hum of the street outside. Meadowbrook is not empty. The alley is not gone, and I know, with every instinct that screams inside me, that it is still waiting. Waiting for the next time I walk the streets. Waiting for me to notice. Waiting to remind me that some places, some shadows, some alleys are not meant to be understood, only endured. The night had stretched long, heavier than any patrol I had ever done. Meadowbrook wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, suffocating, filled with invisible weight that pressed against every part of me. After what had happened in the alley, after the flickering windows, after the static-filled calls that weren't calls at all, I felt it in my bones. I was not alone. And whatever was out there was patient. I had decided to check the perimeter, the old procedure every officer learns on their first week. Walk the streets, ensure no trespassers, no anomalies. But tonight, the routine felt different. Each step carried the weight of something unseen watching, following. Every corner I rounded, every shadow I passed seemed to stretch, bend, lean toward me. The patrol car sat parked near the town square, its headlights slicing through the fog that had started to roll in. I grabbed my flashlight, radio in hand, and stepped onto the cracked pavement. The square was empty, too empty. Even in a town this quiet, there was usually a stray cat or the distant hum of an old refrigerator from someone's home. Tonight, nothing. Just the fog, drifting low, curling around the streetlights like smoke. I started down Main Street, flashlight in hand. The light barely penetrated the mist, but it revealed the familiar, the diner, the church, the old hardware store. Everything was there, unchanged. Yet the air had shifted. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, in the way my hands trembled despite my effort to keep them steady. Then I heard it. A faint sound behind me. Footsteps? Maybe. Not mine, though they were almost in sync with my pace. I froze, flashlight sweeping behind me, but the mist swallowed everything. Nothing visible. Just the weight, the awareness. Something there, moving with me, just out of sight. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Fatigue, stress. After hours of this patrol, it would be natural to mishear. But instinct refused. My gut told me I wasn't imagining it. Something was following me. Something unseen, deliberate, aware. I increased my pace, heart hammering. The sound behind me quickened, not in rhythm with my steps, but independent, persistent, almost playful in its patience. I reached the edge of the square, the fog thickening, swallowing the ground. My flashlight caught shapes in the mist, distorted, fleeting, but every time I focused, they vanished. I stopped, breath ragged. The town was silent, yet the weight of presence pressed against me. My skin crawled. I could feel it brushing my back, the pull of awareness that was not human, not animal, not anything I had ever encountered. My radio buzzed softly, static, low, deliberate. I gripped it, thumb hovering over the microphone, but fear froze my voice. What could I say that would make sense? Who would believe me? The footsteps came again, closer this time, synchronized with the whispers of fog around the streetlights. I swung the flashlight, illuminating empty streets, empty buildings. Nothing moved. Yet the sensation of being watched grew stronger, curling around me like tendrils of ice. I tried to walk faster, scanning constantly, senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to pulse, to shift just enough to suggest presence. Every step echoed unnaturally, carrying with it the sense that something mirrored my movements, patient, deliberate, waiting for me to slip, to notice, to become trapped in the weight of its attention. I reached the alley near the hardware store, the one that had vanished before. The fog curled over the cobblestones like liquid, hiding the familiar shapes of the street. I stopped. My stomach knotted. The alley should have been gone, sealed by the town's own geometry. Yet now in the fog I saw it. Narrow walls, shadows stretching between them, a pulse of awareness that pressed against me. It wasn't fully there, not in a way I could touch, but it existed, and it was waiting. I swallowed hard, flashlight shaking slightly. I remembered the first time I had encountered this place, how it had disappeared, how the alley itself seemed alive. And now, standing on its threshold again, I realized it had been waiting for me. Patiently, deliberately, and I had returned. A sound, a whisper maybe, or the scrape of unseen nails against brick, rose from the alley. I couldn't place it, couldn't understand it, but it carried intent, awareness, and with it, a rising dread. I could feel eyes in the darkness, eyes without bodies tracking every breath, every blink, every heartbeat. I stepped back, heart hammering, and the weight pressed harder. I knew deep in my chest that the alley, the fog, the shadows, they were not just anomalies. They were alive in a sense I could barely comprehend. Patient predators, waiting, studying, aware. And now they had me. I ran, not recklessly but deliberately, trying to put distance between myself and the alley, the fog, the presence that pressed behind me. Every step carried awareness, the weight following, brushing my mind like fingers through water. The town itself seemed to bend, streets stretching and contracting, corners curving unnaturally. I had been trained to expect fatigue, to trust instincts, and my instincts screamed that reality itself was bending around me. I reached the patrol car, sliding inside, locking the doors. Hands shaking, I fumbled with the engine. Headlights pierced the fog, cutting paths through the empty streets. And still, I felt it. Watching, waiting. The alley, the fog, the weight. It had not released me. It had only marked me. I tried to contact dispatch. Unit 12 to dispatch, I need a static. Low, insistent, humming in rhythm with my pulse. Not random, responsive, focused. The unseen presence wasn't just around me. It was in me. It mirrored me, anticipated me, pressed against the edges of perception. It had followed me from the alley, through the streets, to the patrol car, and I could do nothing but sit, frozen, aware of it. I drove slowly, headlights slicing through the fog, eyes scanning every corner, every window. Familiar streets twisted subtly in ways I could not explain. Shadows shifted independently of the light, stretching toward me, then retreating. The town wasn't just quiet. It was alive in awareness, deliberate, patient. It knew I had noticed. And now, I could feel its attention pressing down, inexorable, like a weight that would not release. Hours passed. The fog began to lift, the streets became clearer. But the sensation didn't fade. It lingered deep in my bones. Wherever I went, whatever I did, I could feel the presence following, patient, watching. The patrol car's radio hummed softly, low, deliberate, syncing with my heartbeat. I couldn't escape it. Not in the town, not in the night, not in the reality that had begun to warp around me. I parked near the edge of town, trying to steady my breath, trying to tell myself it was over. But even in the silence, I could feel it. Awareness without form, presence without body, tracking me. It had followed me through the fog, through streets, through alleys that shouldn't exist. It had left no mark I could see, but the memory of its attention burned deep, leaving me raw, alert, terrified. I tried to write it off, rationalize it, fatigue, stress, isolation, but deep down I knew better. Something had followed me tonight, something beyond comprehension, and it would not stop. I had seen it, felt it, endured it, and I knew with every instinct screaming in my mind that the alley, the fog, the weight, they were not finished with me. By the time dawn crept over the horizon, I had driven every familiar street, checked every empty lot, every building. The town seemed calm again, quiet, mundane. But I knew the calm was a lie. The presence, the awareness, the patient watcher, it was still there. just waiting, watching, and I could not escape it. I left Meadowbrook for a time, returning home, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. But the feeling never left. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Light bent oddly around familiar objects, and every faint sound carried intent. I understood finally that some shifts, some presences, some attentions could not be avoided. The weight of that night remains with me. The fog, the alley, the unseen follower, it marked me. Not physically, but in a way that reality itself felt altered. I can hear it in the static now, in the echoes of footsteps that aren't there. I can feel it in the subtle shifts of shadows, in the awareness of walls and air around me. Meadowbrook is quiet again, outwardly ordinary. But I know the truth. The presence remains, patient, attentive, waiting, and I will always feel it, always know it, because once it follows you, there is no true escape. It was just past midnight when the call came through, low and hesitant over the crackling radio. A resident reported noises at the old Jensen barn, the one no one had used for years. I had driven past it 100 times, and every time it loomed in the distance, its outline stark against the dark sky, I felt a little thrill of unease. Tonight, that unease had grown heavier. I double-checked my patrol car, headlights cutting through the fog that had begun to settle over the rural roads. The streets were empty, and the silence pressed against me as if it were solid. My hands gripped the wheel a little tighter, a nervous rhythm that matched the low hum of the engine. The call had said, strange noises. Not screams, not voices, just noises. Thumps, shuffles, and the kind of sound that disappears the moment you focus on it. It was enough to send a chill down my spine. The drive out to the barn was long. I passed cornfields swaying in the fog, the road barely visible in the beams of my headlights. Everything seemed unnaturally quiet. Usually you hear the rustle of wind through the trees, the distant sound of animals, but tonight, nothing. Only the car tires whispering against the asphalt. I reached the turnoff, the dirt road leading to the barn hidden under shadows and fog. I slowed, headlights illuminating nothing but darkness, and my pulse quickened. The radio buzzed again, static briefly swallowing the silence, then quiet. My finger hovered over the microphone, half expecting the caller to add something, but nothing came. I stepped out of the car, flashlight in hand. The night air was cold, damp, carrying the scent of earth and decay. The barn sat ahead, half hidden in the fog. Its wood was weathered and gray, boards warped from years of neglect. Windows were dark and empty, staring back at me like hollow eyes. The kind of stare that makes you feel watched even when no one is there. I approached slowly, each step deliberate. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, loud in the stillness. Every instinct told me to stay alert, to expect the unexpected, to trust that gut feeling that had been growing since the moment I got the call. I reached the barn doors, heavy and splintered. I paused, listening. The noises had stopped. Just silence, thick and suffocating. My flashlight's beam danced across the wood, revealing nothing unusual. No movement, no shadow, only the peeling paint and warped planks. And yet, something felt off. I couldn't explain it, not rationally. The hairs on my arms stood up. A sense of attention pressed against me, like the air itself was aware of my presence. Not wind, not cold, not shadow. Something else. Something watching. I pushed the door open. It creaked, and the sound seemed to echo unnaturally, longer than it should have in such a small space. Inside, the barn was filled with the usual debris. Old hay, broken tools, cobwebs. But the smell was different. Sharper, metallic almost, like something had been here very recently. My flashlight swept across the room, cutting through shadows that seemed to gather in corners, thick and heavy. Then I heard it. A faint sound, almost imperceptible at first. A shuffle, a scrape, a movement too deliberate to be a rat or the wind. I froze, trying to pinpoint it. My pulse hammered in my ears, loud, echoing. Every muscle in my body tensed. I took a cautious step forward, flashlight beam scanning side to side. The hay rustled faintly, though no one should have been here. I could feel the presence again, pressing against me, not physically, but in that deep, instinctive way that makes your skin crawl. Something was in the barn with me. Something unseen, deliberate, aware. I called out softly. "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the barn. No answer came. Only the faintest whisper of movement, just beyond the reach of the light. I remembered my training. Sweep the area, maintain awareness, stay calm. But rational thought was difficult when the sense of being watched pressed so heavily. Each shadow seemed to twitch slightly when I wasn't looking. Each corner thickened with anticipation. I edged further in, boots crunching on scattered hay, flashlight beam trembling slightly. The barn was old, abandoned, harmless in theory. But the feeling of attention, of awareness, grew stronger. I could feel it tracking me, measuring me as if it were learning my movements. A sudden scrape came from behind a stack of crates. My breath caught in my throat. I swung the flashlight, revealing nothing but shadow. And then, fleetingly, I thought I saw movement, a shape that vanished when I blinked. My heart raced, and I reminded myself, this is how fear works. This is how isolation works. The mind fills in gaps. But deep down, I knew that explanation felt hollow. Too hollow. I moved closer to the center of the barn, flashlight scanning every corner. The noise came again, shuffling. Light thumps against the wood floor. Not rhythmic, not predictable. Random, deliberate, unnerving. My palms were slick on the flashlight. I wanted to call for backup, to leave. But something rooted me in place, curiosity mixing with dread. I thought about the call, how the resident had been vague, hesitant, almost afraid of what they'd reported. They hadn't screamed, hadn't run, just heard noises. That meant someone or something had been here before me. And now, I was here, alone. The shuffling grew slightly louder, moving from one side of the barn to the other. I followed the sound cautiously, flashlight swinging, scanning. Shadows stretched across the walls, pooling unnaturally, as if the corners themselves were bending toward me. My pulse thudded, chest tight, and then it stopped. Silence, thick, suffocating. My ears rang in the absence of sound. I felt the presence more acutely, pressing against my awareness like a weight. Not threatening, not yet, but patient, waiting, studying. I tried to steady my breathing, whispering reminders to myself. Stay calm, assess, record. But the rational voice faltered in the face of instinctual dread. Something had been here, something unseen. And I knew, even without seeing it, that it hadn't left. I edged toward the barn door again, heart hammering, flashlight cutting narrow slices through the dark. The fog outside, the quiet roads, the empty fields. I longed for them, for the illusion of safety, but the weight followed me. Not physically, not audibly, but in that instinctive way that makes your gut twist and your hair stand on end. As I stepped out, the barn behind me seemed to pulse with attention. The air shifted slightly, carrying the scent of old wood and damp earth, tinged with something else I couldn't place. I climbed back into the patrol car, doors locking with a satisfying click, and took a deep breath. The roads back were quiet, deceptively so. The fog curled around headlights, softening the edges of reality. My hands still shook, radio silent except for low static. I knew I would return to this call in my mind for weeks, replaying the sounds, the weight, the attention. Something had been there, something unseen, and it had known I was coming. Even now, writing this, I can feel it lingering in the corners of my memory. Patient, deliberate. That night, the barn wasn't just abandoned. It was alive in a way I can't explain, aware, and it remembered. And I will never forget the sense of being watched, studied, and measured by something that should not exist in the quiet, rural night. I didn't want to go back inside the barn. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to drive off into the fog-covered roads and forget this place existed. But curiosity, that stubborn itch of responsibility, dragged me back. The radio crackled faintly, a reminder that the world outside still existed. But inside the barn, time felt suspended, thick with something unseen, something alive. I stepped carefully across the threshold, flashlight cutting narrow swaths through the darkness. The scent of damp hay and old wood hit me first, a familiar rural smell twisted by something acrid I couldn't identify. The barn seemed larger than I remembered, stretching wider and taller in the shadows, the corners deep and unreadable. Every sound of my boots on the floor echoed unnaturally, swallowed by the vast emptiness, yet magnified in my head. I paused, letting my eyes adjust, letting the beam of light sweep across the stacks of hay. And then I saw them. Shadows, fleeting and peripheral, slipping between the stacks. Not cast by anything I could see, but alive in a way that made the air tense, almost suffocating. They weren't constant. They moved too quickly, disappearing when I turned the flashlight directly toward them. But I felt their presence, deliberate and patient, brushing at the edges of perception. My hands shook. I tried to steady the flashlight, remind myself that this was an abandoned barn. Old hay shifts on its own. Shadows bend strangely in light. But the instinct in my gut, the unreasoning dread, told me this was different. The shadows had intent. They were aware of me, watching, waiting. I took a step forward, and the haystacks seemed to shift slightly, like a breeze had moved through them, but there was no wind. The shadows flickered, retreating and stretching at the same time, almost playfully. I swallowed hard, voice tight in my throat, whispering, "Hello? Is someone there?" My own words sounded absurd, swallowed by the air, yet the weight of attention pressed back against me. I edged deeper into the barn, scanning each corner with the flashlight. Every shadow that appeared vanished the moment I focused on it, replaced by empty darkness. And yet my peripheral vision caught them again and again. Small movements at first, an edge twitching, a streak of black between the beams of light. Then larger, bolder motions, always just beyond the reach of clarity. I felt a prickle along my spine, the low hum of anxiety growing into something physical. Something was in here with me, and it was aware. I could sense its patience, its deliberateness. It didn't need to attack, didn't need to speak. Its very presence was enough to make the barn feel alive, aware, waiting for me to make a misstep. I remembered my training. Keep calm, sweep the area, record everything, maintain awareness. But rational thought faltered under the pressure of instinctual terror. My mind wanted explanations, logical ones, but nothing fit. This was not logic. This was attention without form, awareness without body, pressure without weight. The shadows moved again, closer this time, as if inspecting me, studying me. My flashlight caught glimpses of dark shapes among the haystacks, but always too fleeting, too peripheral to grasp. I realized I was holding my breath, too afraid to exhale for fear that any sound would draw notice. The air itself felt alive, as though the barn had grown aware of my presence and now focused all of its intent on me. A scraping noise echoed from the far corner. Metal against wood. I flinched, swinging the flashlight toward it. Nothing. Just empty space, haystacks bending slightly as if something had passed through them. My pulse spiked. I could feel the shadows pulsing along the edges of my vision, almost playful in their patience, almost daring me to notice them fully. I took another step, careful, measured, and the barn seemed to respond. The shadows retreated slightly, only to reappear closer, anticipating my movement. I realized with growing horror that I wasn't walking through this barn, I was being guided. Every motion I made, every step, every breath was observed, studied, measured by something that had no name, no form, and yet undeniably existed. I tried to speak again. "I'm an officer. I just want to check. Nothing's happening." My voice cracked, swallowed by the thick air, and the shadows pulsed at the edges of vision, almost vibrating with awareness. I felt a strange, irrational anger from the darkness, as if it resented my intrusion, resented my attempt to impose reason on a space that defied it. I edged closer to the center of the barn, flashlight scanning the ceiling, the walls, the floor. Every corner, every crevice seemed to deepen, stretching the dimensions beyond normal comprehension. Shadows writhed and flickered in ways that defied logic, slipping along the walls and ceiling, vanishing into thin air, yet leaving the sense of intent behind. I stopped near a pile of old hay bales, heart hammering, breaths sharp. One shadow lingered longer than the others, coalescing at the periphery of my vision. I swung the flashlight directly toward it, and it was gone. But I felt it closer, pressing against my awareness, brushing my mind like a cold hand through fog. I staggered back, gripping the beam tighter, trying to force rational thought. "Focus," I whispered to myself. "Record. Observe. Nothing here can hurt you." The words felt hollow. I knew, as deep as I knew anything, that this was not about danger in a physical sense. This was about being watched, measured, weighed, about realizing that the barn itself, and whatever lingered in it, existed on a plane of attention I couldn't comprehend. A sudden movement drew my eye to the far wall. Shadows pooled unnaturally, twisting and coiling along the wood, forming shapes that defied geometry. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something resembling a figure, thin and elongated, eyes where eyes should not be. Then, with a blink, or maybe the flash of the light, it was gone. But the sense of being observed, deliberate and patient, remained, pressing against the corners of my mind. I moved toward the exit, every step careful, measured, aware of the shifting shadows, and yet they didn't retreat fully. They stayed at the edges of vision, sliding along walls and haystacks, patient and attentive. It was as if they wanted me to leave, but only on their terms. My pulse raced, adrenaline surging, yet I felt an irrational compulsion to linger, to see, to understand, even though every instinct screamed not to. I reached the barn doors, hand on the handle, and paused. The shadows swirled at the edges of my vision, almost playful, almost alive, waiting for me to make a choice. I took a deep breath and pushed through. The night air hit me, sharp and cold, and the barn seemed to exhale behind me, empty once again, yet still aware. I climbed into the patrol car, shaking, hands slick on the wheel, breath uneven. The barn sat in the distance, quiet, seemingly abandoned. But I knew better. I could feel it, lingering, watching, aware. The shadows had left a mark, a pulse of attention that stayed with me, crawling along the edges of perception even as I drove back toward town. The night stretched on, fog curling around headlights, silence pressing against the patrol car. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, that fatigue and isolation had twisted perception. But I couldn't shake the awareness, the patient, deliberate attention that followed me. The shadows among the hay were not gone. They had simply returned to their unseen places, waiting, watching, marking me as someone who had seen too much. Even now, hours later, the memory clings. Every corner of my mind echoes with movement at the periphery, fleeting shapes in empty spaces, the sensation of being measured, of being observed by something patient, deliberate, and beyond understanding. The barn isn't just abandoned, it's alive in attention, and I carry that presence with me, silent and patient wherever I go. I shouldn't have gone back. Every rational part of me knew that. The barn had already made its presence known. Shadows among the hay, shapes flickering at the edges of my vision, the oppressive sense of awareness pressing down on me. It had marked me. And yet curiosity, stubborn and irrational, dragged me forward. I told myself I needed to confirm nothing had been disturbed, that perhaps some rational explanation existed. But deep down I knew the truth. There was no explanation. I stepped across the threshold, flashlight in hand, and immediately felt it. The weight of attention pressing against me, patient, deliberate. The air was thick, damp, smelling of old hay and rusted metal, with a sharp undercurrent of something else I couldn't identify. My boots scuffed the floorboards, each sound echoing too loudly, bouncing back in uneven rhythms that made me flinch. The barn seemed to stretch, the ceiling higher, the corners deeper than they had moments ago. Shadows moved along the walls, fleeting, almost playful in their patience. I spun the flashlight around, catching glimpses of dark shapes shifting among the hay bales. Every time I blinked, or even thought about blinking, the shapes seemed to move, closer or in angles that shouldn't have been possible. I shook my head. "No, can't be," I whispered to myself. But my own voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the still, suffocating air. A crate tipped over, not with the slow, predictable creak of gravity, but as if something had nudged it deliberately, and it rolled across the floor, stopping just short of my feet. My heart jumped into my throat. I swept the flashlight beam across the floor. Nothing, only the crate, lying as though it had always been that way, yet shifted. I knew I hadn't moved it. I couldn't have. I took a step back, hand pressed to the wall for balance. Every instinct screamed to leave, to get back to the patrol car and drive until the barn was just a memory. But a mix of adrenaline and that terrible, unrelenting curiosity kept me rooted. And that's when I noticed it. The small objects on the shelves, scattered tools, loose hay, subtly, almost imperceptibly moving. Not sliding from gravity, not nudged by wind, but relocating, repositioning themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Blink. Something shifted. I froze. My pulse hammered, each beat loud and intrusive in the stillness. My flashlight trembled in my hand, and when I swung it quickly toward a stack of tools, one of the hammers was gone. It hadn't fallen, it hadn't rolled. It was gone, and when I blinked again, it was back, lying at an impossible angle on the floor. The air thickened. The barn seemed to breathe around me, inhaling as I stepped, exhaling when I paused. The shadows flickered faster now, coalescing briefly into shapes I couldn't name, then dissolving when I tried to focus. I realized I wasn't walking through the barn anymore. I was walking through its attention. Every step I took, every blink, every slight movement of my head was observed, measured, responded to. I tried to speak, to remind myself that this was a physical place, a finite space, nothing alive. It's just hay, old wood. Nothing's moving on its own, I whispered. But the words had no power. The movements continued. A chair shifted slightly. A pile of hay bales leaned more than gravity should allow. My radio crackled faintly, static layering itself into an almost deliberate pattern. It felt like it was synchronized with my heartbeat. I turned quickly toward a stack of crates. One of them tilted, and when I blinked, it had fallen completely, revealing a narrow passage behind it I hadn't seen before. My mind raced. The barn was not what it appeared to be. Its shape wasn't fixed, its geometry wasn't stable, and something alive with awareness, was orchestrating it. A scratching sound rose from the far corner, soft at first, then growing. Not nails on wood, not rodents, not wind. Something deliberate, purposeful. I moved toward it cautiously, flashlight sweeping, every nerve taut. The closer I got, the more the objects shifted. Tools rotated slightly, crates inched forward, shadows flickered in ways that defied physics. And then I saw it. A figure, impossible to focus on, standing just at the edge of my vision. I blinked and it was gone. My heart seized in my chest. I blinked again. It was there, slightly closer, not fully formed, its edges flickering like the shadows themselves had come alive. Panic clawed at me, sharp and insistent. I realized then that the barn was testing me, watching me, measuring my fear. Every instinct screamed to escape, but my mind was paralyzed with the certainty that whatever this was, it had patience. It wasn't in a hurry. I felt the attention press against me, closer, more deliberate, as if it could sense my thoughts, my hesitation, my growing terror. A crate tipped again. A tool rolled off a shelf. I stumbled backward, flashlight swinging wildly. Each object that moved was subtle, almost playful, but deliberate enough to unsettle me beyond reason. It was a language I didn't understand, a communication in the only medium it needed, attention and movement. I turned toward the exit, every step careful, yet aware that each blink, each moment I looked away, was an invitation for the barn to shift further. Shadows stretched along walls, floorboards warped beneath my feet, hay bales leaned at impossible angles. The barn was alive, aware, and I was a trespasser it could toy with. A figure emerged briefly, flickering at the edge of vision. Thin, elongated, featureless, yet I felt its gaze. I froze, unable to breathe. Then it blinked, or maybe it was I, and it vanished. The objects that had moved settled back into place, almost as if nothing had happened, but the memory of movement remained, pressing in my mind. I stumbled toward the door, flashlight beams swinging erratically. The floor seemed to stretch and shift. I could feel the attention of the shadows, deliberate and patient, following me, aware of my every step. My hands were slick, palms trembling on the flashlight, mind racing with a terror that had nothing to do with physical harm. This was psychological, perceptual. The barn itself was alive in a way I could not fully comprehend, A sudden noise, a soft thump, came from the far corner. I turned toward it, and the objects shifted again. The hammers, the crates, the loose hay, they moved subtly, almost tauntingly. I realized I was being led, herded, tested. Each step I took was being observed, evaluated. Every blink, every hesitation, every breath, it all mattered to whatever was here. Panic finally broke through rational thought. I ran, stumbling over loose hay, boots skidding on the uneven floor. Objects moved around me, shifting subtly, never blocking, never directly attacking, just existing in deliberate ways that made escape harder, disorienting. Shadows darted along the walls, thick and alive, pulsing with awareness. I reached the door, yanking it open. The cold night air hit me like a wall, fog curling around my boots. I didn't stop. I ran to the patrol car, heart hammering, every muscle taut with fear. I could still feel the barn's attention pressing, following, patient and deliberate. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine. Even as I drove away, the memory of movement lingered. Objects shifting when I blinked, shadows stretching impossibly, shapes at the edge of vision. It all pressed against my mind. I realized I had been tested, toyed with, observed by something that did not need form to exist. The barn itself was alive in attention, deliberate, patient, and it had not let me leave without knowing that I had seen it, felt it, endured it. The road back was quiet, fog curling around headlights, but the sensation never faded. Every subtle shift in shadow, every flicker in the corner of vision reminded me that whatever was in the barn had not ended its observation. I could still feel it, pressing at the edges of awareness, patient, deliberate, and impossibly aware. I parked at home, lights on, doors locked. The patrol car felt like a fragile shield against the unseen. I tried to rationalize, tell myself fatigue, imagination, stress, but I knew better. The barn had awareness, patience, a deliberate intelligence in the way objects moved, the way shadows flickered, and it had chosen to make sure I left knowing that fact, haunted by it. Even now, I can feel the residual pressure in my mind. Objects at the edge of vision seem to twitch, shadows seem to stretch toward awareness, and every time I blink, I am reminded of the patience, the deliberate attention that waits in that barn, in that darkness, measuring and observing. I have seen what lives there, what moves when you blink, and I cannot unsee it. I will not return, I cannot, but I know it still waits. Patient, deliberate, shifting, moving, alive in attention, aware of every thought I have, and the knowledge of it follows me, silent and constant, wherever I go. The call came in just as the moon dipped behind a bank of clouds, leaving the creek and surrounding woods swathed in almost complete darkness. The dispatcher's voice was calm, measured, but I could hear the hesitancy behind it. Something about the report unsettled even them. A resident had seen a glowing figure near the water, moving along the edge of the creek as though it belonged to the night itself. My stomach twisted. The kind of uneasy anticipation you get when you know you're about to see something you might never understand. I rolled the patrol car slowly down the empty road, headlights slicing through the fog that had settled low over the fields. The world was quiet. Not the usual quiet you get in the country at night, where crickets chirp and the wind rustles the trees. This was a vacuum, a void of sound that pressed against the ears and made the silence feel almost deliberate. As I approached the creek, my eyes caught movement, light glimmering across the water. I slowed, gripping the wheel tighter, trying to make sense of it. At first, I thought it might be a reflection, a trick of the fog. But the glow was too steady, too warm, almost human in its motion. It drifted along the edge of the creek like a living thing, moving with intention, pausing now and then as if observing me in return. I parked at the edge of the dirt path, engine idling, and stepped out. The night air was thick and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. My flashlight cut a narrow beam into the fog, and I swept it across the tree line. Nothing. Only shadows stretching unnaturally, bending in ways that made my stomach twist with unease. The glow was still there, faint but steady, hovering near the water's edge. I called out softly, voice low, careful. "Hello, anyone there?" My words sounded absurd, swallowed by the fog and the trees. There was no answer, only the low hum of my own nerves thrumming in my chest. The glow flickered, and I took a step closer, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. I could feel it, this presence, watching, patient, deliberate. It didn't move like an animal, didn't behave like a human. It drifted, impossible smooth, almost floating above the ground. The fog twisted around it, refracting the light in a way that made it look larger, more ethereal than anything I had ever seen. I reached the creek's edge, water dark and sluggish, reflecting the faint silver of the moon above. The glow remained there, just across the water, a figure vaguely humanoid but impossible to define. I tried to blink, to steady my eyes, and every time I did, the figure seemed to shift slightly, closer, farther, impossible to measure. I could feel my pulse in my throat, hammering against the weight of the night, against the stillness. I remembered what the resident had said. They'd been terrified but unable to move, unable to do anything except watch. I understood now. I could see why. The figure's presence wasn't just visual. It pressed against the mind, subtle and unrelenting. Awareness without form, observation without eyes. I felt seen, measured, scrutinized. I took another step forward. The mud squelched under my boots, cold seeping through the soles, and the fog curled around me, thickening with each movement. My flashlight flickered briefly, and for a heartbeat, I thought the glow had vanished. Then it reappeared, drifting along the creek as if it had never moved. I swallowed hard, trying to summon courage, trying to remind myself that this was a night, a creek, a trick of light and imagination. Rational explanations swam in my mind. Glowing jackets, flashlights, some prank, but none of it fit. The figure moved in ways that defied natural physics, paused with a patience that no human could sustain, and seemed to regard me with understanding. I raised the flashlight higher, shining it directly at the glow. The light seemed to scatter in the fog, unable to illuminate it fully. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the figure was slightly closer. A shiver ran down my spine, not from cold, but from the certainty that this was deliberate, that it was aware of my attention and my fear. I took a step back, heart hammering. The creek's water lapped quietly, deceptively normal, but my instincts screamed that nothing here was ordinary. The glow pulsed subtly, almost like it breathed, rising and falling in intensity, alive in a way that made my stomach twist. I fumbled for the radio, trying to call dispatch. My hands were slick with sweat, shaking. Dispatch. Do you copy? I see something. Near the creek, I don't know what it is. Static swallowed my words. Then came the faintest reply, garbled and hesitant. The dispatcher sounded concerned, maybe even frightened themselves. I tried to speak again, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure drifted closer, indistinct yet undeniably present. I could feel the air shift around it, subtle changes in temperature, pressure, and sound, like the world itself had warped slightly in response to its presence. Every instinct screamed to move, to retreat, but curiosity and dread held me frozen. The glow tilted slightly, almost as if nodding, or maybe it was a trick of the fog, a misinterpretation by a mind already straining under fear. But the moment lasted just long enough to make my skin crawl. Then it moved, drifting upstream along the creek, maintaining that impossible silent float. My pulse raced. I wanted to follow, to chase, but every rational thought screamed at me that this was a mistake. I stepped back onto the path, boots squelching in mud, fog curling around my ankles. The figure paused, almost seeming to regard me again, before drifting silently behind the trees. I could feel it, patient, deliberate, watching, and for the first time in years of patrol, I realized that some things I would never be able to understand, never explain, and never face with reason alone. I stayed there a moment longer, flashlight shaking, observing, heart racing. Then I called it in one last time. It's moving away. I'm leaving the area. My voice was thin, tremulous. Static crackled on the radio, almost in reply, as if the night itself were listening. As I drove back to the main road, the fog thickened, curling around the headlights, swallowing the car in a haze of white and gray. I tried to convince myself that the figure was gone, just a trick of light and imagination. But I knew better. I had felt its awareness, its attention. I had been observed, measured, and in some inexplicable way, it had chosen to show itself, even now when I think back. The image lingers, the glow at the edge of the creek, the way it drifted, patient, deliberate, impossibly still yet alive. I can feel its presence in my memory, pressing against my awareness, a quiet reminder that some things in the night are not just unseen, but unknowable, unreasoning in their logic, and utterly alive in ways the mind cannot comprehend. I parked at the station, hands still shaking, heartbeat echoing. The memory of that light followed me into the office, across the empty streets, through the quiet fields outside town. I cannot explain what I saw. I cannot rationalize it, but I know what I felt. And that feeling, being watched, measured, observed by something that should not exist, has followed me ever since. The creek is silent now. The night is quiet, but I can still feel it there, patient, deliberate, waiting. And I know that the next time someone calls about a light in the woods, I will answer, but I will never forget the weight of attention that night. The certainty that something alive in the dark had chosen to make itself seen. Word count. 1,302 words. I shouldn't have followed it. That much I knew the instant I stepped off the patrol path, flashlight barely cutting through the fog and shadows. The glow, soft, amber, almost inviting, hovered near the tree line, bobbing slowly like a lantern carried by someone who didn't want to be seen. My rational mind screamed to stay put, to call it in, to mark the location and wait for backup. But something in me, stubborn, reckless, curious, drove me forward. The air was thick with mist, curling around my boots and dampening the sound of my steps. Each footfall felt heavier, as if the fog itself was trying to pull me back, slow me down. I told myself it was my imagination, the adrenaline, the tension of being alone at night. But when I blinked, and I swear this is true, the lantern seemed to shift slightly farther from where I thought it had been, always just out of reach, always teasing. I moved cautiously, flashlight beam sweeping side to side, trying to catch more than just the glow. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their trunks twisted, knotted, and black against the fog. The wind whispered softly through the branches, carrying voices I couldn't quite make out. At first I thought it was the wind playing tricks, leaves rustling, branches knocking. But the whispers were different. Low, urgent, almost sentient, brushing at my ears in patterns that mimicked words but never fully formed them. "Hello?" I called out, voice hoarse, swallowed immediately by the fog. No reply. Only the gentle bobbing of the lantern and the faint, deliberate rhythm of something breathing in the night. My pulse hammered. I tried to focus, to convince myself I was still grounded in reality. The ground beneath my boots was uneven, the fog thickening with each step, curling around my legs and settling like water in the folds of my pants. The lantern seemed to drift, weaving between trees in ways that made no sense. I would pass a tree, blink, and it would be on the other side. I stopped several times, spun slowly, trying to triangulate its location, trying to reassure myself it wasn't moving with intention. But every time I thought I had measured it, it had shifted, just far enough to remain mysterious, just far enough to make the hair on my neck stand on end. The whispers grew louder as I moved. Not words, at least not in any language I understood, but a pattern of sound that pressed against the skull, insistent, intimate, impossible to ignore. My heartbeat thudded in time with it, dissonant and jarring, making me stumble on a hidden route. I cursed under my breath, brushing the mud from my uniform, but the presence, the lantern, the whispers, the fog, was relentless. I realized then that I had lost any sense of direction. The tree line, which should have been familiar, twisted and bent in ways that disoriented me. Each blink, each shift of the flashlight seemed to subtly change the landscape. The fog rearranged itself. The lantern moved just out of reach, and the whispers. They were everywhere and nowhere, circling, brushing past me like fingers through the mist. I tried to call dispatch again, radio static crackling in my ears. "Dispatch, I'm following a light near the creek. Something's not right." Static swallowed the rest. The voices in the wind seemed to respond in kind, murmuring patterns that made my stomach knot and my teeth clench. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination, stress, or something alive, something deliberate. The lantern paused for a moment near a cluster of trees just ahead, just far enough to make me strain to see it. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. "All right," I whispered. "Just check it out. Keep it simple. See if it's a person, someone lost." Rational words, useless against the weight pressing at my mind. The fog shifted again. I blinked, and the lantern moved slightly, subtly, almost playfully. I stepped closer, boots sinking into damp leaves and mud. The whispers grew stronger, more urgent, brushing at my ears with suggestion, warning, maybe even mockery. I spun in a circle trying to identify their source, but the forest itself seemed alive with them, murmuring in the spaces between the trees, behind my skull pressing into my thoughts. Suddenly, the glow bobbed lower, closer to the ground, and my flashlight picked out shapes I hadn't seen before. Rocks arranged in rough circles, fallen branches pointing toward the creek, small depressions in the mud that looked almost like footprints but far too shallow for any human. My stomach sank. The place was prepared, waiting. I wanted to turn back. I really did, but my legs didn't respond. My mind was a war between terror and fascination. I told myself I was a cop, trained to investigate, trained to respond to reports of the unknown. But this wasn't a simple call. This wasn't a person lost, or a prank, or even a natural phenomenon. This was deliberate. This was alive in ways that didn't make sense. I blinked again, and when I opened my eyes, the lantern was closer, impossibly so, but the path I had taken was now twisted differently. Trees that had been behind me were now before me. Footprints that hadn't been there moments ago appeared, then vanished. I realized, with a sick twist in my stomach, that the forest itself was no longer fixed. The lantern was guiding me, but not physically, psychologically, perceptually. It was leading me through a space that warped to its will. A whisper brushed my ear, soft, deliberate, not threatening, not overtly hostile, but intimate enough to make my hair stand on end. "This way," it seemed to say, or at least that was the impression it left. My pulse thundered in my throat as I stepped forward, boots slipping slightly in the mud. The lantern drifting a few feet ahead, always just out of reach, always just enough to maintain its teasing control. I reached the edge of the creek, water dark and reflecting the faint moonlight, disturbed only slightly by the fog curling over its surface. The lantern hovered near the bank, and I froze, unsure whether I should approach or retreat. Every instinct screamed both options at once. I raised the flashlight, sweeping it slowly, and the glow pulsed slightly in response. Like it was aware of my hesitation, measuring it, understanding it, I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Identify yourself. Come out where I can see you." The fog whispered around me in response, the sound rising like breath through the trees, soft and intentional. And then I saw it, a faint, almost indistinct reflection in the water. Not fully formed, not entirely human, but there. A glow that shifted, pulsed, hovered at the edge of comprehension. I stepped closer, and the lantern drifted backward, deeper into the fog. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it was farther still. My pulse raced, my mind scrambling for logic. Each blink, each movement, each step was being watched, considered. The forest, the fog, the lantern, the whispers, it all pressed against me. A living weight, patient, deliberate, and utterly incomprehensible. I finally realized I had no sense of direction, no sense of time. The creek twisted unnaturally, the trees bending in ways that defied memory. The whispers swirled like a current around me, brushing at my thoughts, pressing on my sense of self. I understood then that I wasn't just following a light. I was following its will. It led, I obeyed. And I had no choice but to follow, terrified, mesmerized, utterly unprepared for the reality I was stepping into. I turned back once, hoping to see the path I had come from, but the fog had rearranged everything. The road, the patrol car, the familiar tree line, all gone, replaced with twisting shadows, mist, and the faint, persistent glow ahead. I realized with a cold certainty that I might never find my way back. That this place, this presence, could bend perception, and it was patient, knowing that I would follow step by step, blink by blink. I swallowed, voice trembling. This isn't real, I whispered. But the moment I said it, the lantern pulsed brighter, almost laughing in response, and the whispers crescendoed, brushing my thoughts with something I couldn't name. I stumbled forward, boots slipping, mud sucking at my feet, heart hammering. The creek water lapped quietly, deceptively normal, as if it had nothing to do with the impossible, shifting world around me. I followed. I had to, or at least I felt I had to, and every step, every blink, every hesitant glance over my shoulder reminded me that I was not in control, that I had become part of the lantern's pattern, part of whatever deliberate, patient, incomprehensible awareness had chosen to lead me through the fog and whispers, and perhaps through something far worse. The fog had become almost solid now, thick enough that my flashlight barely cut through it, and the lantern, my reluctant guide, hovered just beyond reach. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the patrol car, to call dispatch and admit I'd gone too far. But something deeper, more stubborn, made my legs move forward, step by step, through the wet undergrowth, toward the amber glow. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was a trick of the fog, a shadow flitting between the tree trunks. My pulse jumped. The lantern's glow illuminated it briefly, and my stomach dropped. A figure stood among the trees, a tall shape, impossibly still, watching me. Not moving toward me, not hiding, just observing. And it wasn't human, or at least it didn't look human. Its proportions were wrong, elongated in subtle ways that made my eyes ache as I tried to comprehend it. Its head was featureless, smooth, pale, reflecting the lantern's light in a way that made it glow faintly against the dark bark behind it. I froze. I wanted to raise my flashlight, call out, even run, but nothing in me could find the courage. My throat was dry, my legs heavy, my mind scrambling for explanation. It didn't breathe, at least not visibly. Its presence was like a weight pressing against the forest itself, bending the fog, muting the usual night sounds. No crickets, no rustling leaves. Nothing but the soft murmur of the creek in the distance and the occasional whisper of wind. Or was that my imagination? I took a cautious step forward. The lantern bobbed slightly, closer, but still distant enough that I couldn't be certain if it had moved at all or if my perception had shifted. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, as though the trees themselves had grown around it, giving it life and shape. I swallowed, dry and sharp, trying to tell myself I was seeing things. I'm a cop, trained to see, trained to judge, trained to act. And yet here I was, paralyzed by a shape, a presence that defied logic and reason. I called out softly. "Who's there? Show yourself." My voice sounded absurd, pitiful even, swallowed immediately by the fog and the oppressive silence. No answer. Only that steady, impossible gaze, unblinking, faceless, watching. I moved again, feet crunching on leaves, mud sucking at my boots, and the figure remained. It didn't shift, didn't lean, didn't move an inch, but somehow I could feel it, like a pressure against the back of my skull, a silent knowledge pressing into my thoughts. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it seemed closer, though the trees between us were unchanged. I tried to remember what I'd learned about perception, about fear. Eyes play tricks, fog distorts distance, adrenaline makes shadows loom. I repeated those rationalizations over and over in my head, willing them to be true, trying desperately to reclaim some control. But the figure wasn't moving. It was the forest itself, warped and rearranged, making it appear closer, larger, more impossible than before. The whispers returned then, curling through the trees, brushing against my mind. Not words, not language, but patterns, suggestions, memories that weren't mine. They nudged at my thoughts, threading fear through every nerve. I blinked again. The figure was there, taller, somehow more imposing, and the fog twisted around its limbs, settling in unnatural folds that made it seem even less part of the real world. I remembered the lantern, the glow that had led me here, that had teased me forward with its soft light. And suddenly the truth slammed into me. It hadn't been guiding me to help or discovery or rescue. It had been guiding me here to this, to the figure, to the realization that I was utterly, completely alone. I wanted to turn and run, but the path I had followed no longer existed. The fog, the trees, the earth itself seemed to have shifted. Every step backward felt like stepping into new, unknown territory, unfamiliar, untrustworthy. And the figure followed, or maybe the forest itself moved it closer, always just beyond comprehension. I blinked again. When I opened my eyes, I could see it clearly, lit by the lantern's strange amber glow. Its head was featureless, yet I felt observed, studied, measured in ways that made my stomach knot and my chest tighten. My flashlight trembled in my hand, and I forced myself to lift it, to sweep the beam across the figure. Light hit it, and the fog reflected, refracting the shape in ways that made it impossible to tell where it ended and the mist began. My pulse was deafening. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs refused. I was trapped between fear and fascination, curiosity and survival. The figure didn't move an inch, but somehow I felt its attention like a physical weight pressing against me. The forest around it seemed to hum, silent, alive, aware. I tried to speak again, voice shaking. What are you? No answer, only the quiet presence, patient, unmoving, and impossibly deliberate. I stepped closer, and the ground beneath my boots sank into wet leaves and mud. The figure remained, faceless, towering, and silent. The whispers grew, brushing at my thoughts, threading fear through my mind in patterns I couldn't untangle. I realized then that I wasn't supposed to understand it. Not fully, not ever. The forest, the fog, the figure. They existed in ways that defied my perception, my senses, my training. Logic didn't apply here. The rules I'd relied on for years were irrelevant. I had stumbled into something else entirely, something patient, deliberate, and utterly unknowable. I tried to move again, backward this time, but each step felt heavier, slower, the fog pressing against my legs as if resisting my escape. The figure didn't advance, didn't retreat, yet I felt encircled, trapped within a space that had no clear boundaries. My mind raced, trying to find a pattern, a rational explanation, anything to regain control. But the fog shifted, the trees rearranged themselves, and the figure remained, constant, observing. Patient, I blinked, once, twice, and with each blink, the figure seemed subtly closer, taller, more imposing. I forced myself to focus, trying to remember the creek behind me, the patrol car, the path I had followed. But all was lost in the fog, twisted and rearranged. I was alone, isolated, and watched by something that defied understanding. The whispers grew louder, curling in my skull, pressing against my thoughts with suggestions, memories, visions that weren't mine. I tried to shake them off, to force myself to breathe, to remember that I had training, that I had tools, that I could survive. But each step, each blink, each hesitation brought me deeper into the figure's space, deeper into the forest's control. Finally, I forced my legs to move, stumbling backward through the mud and leaves, flashlight beam trembling, eyes fixed on the faceless figure. And even as I retreated, even as my mind screamed to escape, I felt its attention, patient, deliberate, and completely unconcerned with the laws of nature, of reality, or of fear. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at that shape among the trees. Time didn't pass the way it should. Seconds stretched into eternity. The fog thickened, the whispers circled, and the lantern hovered, distant and teasing. I realized with a cold certainty that I wasn't just observing. I was being observed, measured, tested, and whatever this was, faceless, towering, impossible. It would wait, patient, deliberate, until it decided what to do next. I finally stepped away, cautiously, slowly, never turning my back completely. My boots squelched in the mud. The forest shifted subtly around me, and the figure remained, always just at the edge of perception. I knew I would leave that clearing, but I would never leave the feeling behind. That weight of attention, that silent observation, that knowledge that some presence in the world sees you, knows you, and exists beyond comprehension. And even now, thinking back, the image lingers, the tall, faceless shape, unmoving, patient, watching, waiting. I didn't stop running, not for a second. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, trees bending and twisting as if the world itself had reshaped to trap me. My boots sank into wet leaves, my uniform soaked with fog and sweat, lungs burning with every ragged inhale. Behind me, the faceless figure had disappeared, or at least I told myself it had. But I knew better. I could feel its presence like a weight pressing through the air, patient, deliberate, always aware of me. I stumbled onto the patrol road, blinking through the mist, gasping, disoriented. The forest's edge should have felt like safety, but even there I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. The air was thick, heavy with dampness and dread. I forced myself to look forward, to focus on the patrol car I had left parked near the road, the lights dim, the engine cold. And then I saw it, in the rearview mirror, reflected in the windshield just behind me. The shape of the figure shimmered, tall, faceless, standing among the trees at the forest's edge. My heart froze. I blinked, forced myself to turn my head, and it was gone. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the reflection, fog and glass playing games with my eyes, but the certainty in the pit of my stomach refused comfort. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. I couldn't stay. I had to get out of there, far from the forest, far from the lantern, far from whatever had been watching me. The engine roared to life as I fumbled with the keys, fog curling around the car like fingers trying to pull me back. I slammed it into drive and tore down the road, tires slipping on wet asphalt, adrenaline blinding me to caution. Every curve, every turn of the patrol car seemed endless, the road stretching unnaturally, twisting against my sense of direction. The forest loomed on both sides, thick and oppressive, as if it had grown while I wasn't looking, reshaping itself, maintaining its grasp. I tried to call dispatch, my voice shaking, but the radio crackled with static, the usual channels distorted. No voices, only that same low hum, that subtle pressure against my thoughts, threading unease through every nerve. I tried again, desperately, repeating my location, trying to make sense of the impossible. No response. Just static, and a whisper in my mind that wasn't mine. Never look back. The words echoed, chilling me, and I couldn't stop my eyes from glancing at every reflective surface. Windows of abandoned houses, the shiny hood of a rusted car, puddles on the roadside, all seemed to hold a shimmer, a hint of movement, a shadow that wasn't entirely natural. Always at the edge, always watching. I clenched my jaw, telling myself I was imagining things. I had to be, but deep down I knew I wasn't imagining. The forest, the lantern, the faceless figure, it had followed me out, in a way that defied logic. My pulse raced as I drove, headlights cutting through the night, fog curling like smoke around the road. I passed a house with darkened windows and froze. In one window, just for a fraction of a second, the figure's reflection stood behind me in the passenger seat, impossibly close, impossibly still. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, swallowing dry bile, forcing myself to look forward and ignore the reflections that now haunted every surface. I passed more houses, more windows, each one teasing glimpses, shapes that weren't there a moment ago, shadows stretching unnaturally. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake the sense of being followed, of being observed by something patient, deliberate, and utterly beyond comprehension. My headlights caught the surface of a small pond and I froze. The reflection rippled in the wind. But the figure was there, faceless, towering, reflected perfectly in the water as if waiting for me. I looked away, couldn't look at it. I couldn't. I told myself to focus, to drive, to survive, to put as much distance between myself and the forest as possible. And yet every reflective surface, every puddle, every glass pane teased me, reminding me it was still there, always there, patient, watching. The road wound onward, narrow and empty, and I realized with growing horror that it seemed longer than memory suggested. I passed familiar markers, an old mailbox, a bend in the road, a weathered fence. But the sense of space was wrong, distorted, pressing against me. I blinked, and the landmarks shifted subtly, as if the world itself were pliable, bending to maintain the presence of whatever I had encountered. I tried to rationalize, to force logic over fear. Stress, adrenaline, hallucinations, exhaustion, that had to explain it. It had to. But my eyes betrayed me, and the reflections betrayed me. Every time I passed a shiny surface, a puddle, a window, the figure appeared again. Not moving, just observing, measuring, patient. I could feel it in my chest, a weight pressing against my ribs, cold and deliberate, threading dread through every nerve. At one point, I drove past an abandoned barn and froze. Its windows were shattered, doors hanging on rusted hinges, yet I could see it clearly in the broken glass. The faceless figure, standing in the corner, just beyond reach, impossible to ignore. I blinked and it vanished, leaving only the broken reflections of the night. My throat tightened, and I realized I hadn't breathed for several heartbeats. I forced myself forward, hands trembling, vision blurred with fear and fog. The road began to climb, winding upward toward the highway, toward safety, toward something that resembled normalcy. Yet even there, on the edge of town, I couldn't escape the sense of being followed. Every reflective surface reminded me of its patience, its deliberate observation. The forest hadn't released me. It had adapted, insinuated itself into the world I thought I knew. I passed a convenience store, its fluorescent lights flickering weakly. I parked for a moment, needing to collect myself to make sense of what I'd just seen. The glass doors reflected the interior, rows of snacks and cold drinks. And in the corner of the reflection, I saw it again. The figure, faceless, towering, silent. My breath caught in my throat. I closed my eyes, swallowed, and forced myself to look straight ahead. When I opened them, it was gone. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. I drove on, fast, reckless, heart hammering against my chest. Each turn, each blink, each passing reflective surface was a test. I couldn't stop and I couldn't look back. Never look back. The words from the whispers in the forest repeated, etched into my consciousness, a mantra I couldn't escape. The patrol car eventually reached the highway, the fog thinning slightly, the forest receding. I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. The road was empty. No figure, no lantern, no shadows. Relief flooded me, and I allowed myself a shaky exhale. Maybe it was gone. Maybe I had finally escaped. But even as I drove further toward the city lights, toward normalcy, I couldn't shake it. Windows reflected shapes that weren't mine. Storefronts caught glimmers of something tall and faceless, always at the edge, always watching. My apartment, my reflection in the bathroom mirror, the darkened glass of my patrol car, all seemed to hold that impossible presence. Sleep became impossible. Even in my own home, I saw it in fleeting reflections. In the darkened window of my bedroom at night, it stood silently among the trees I had never planted, in a forest that didn't exist outside my memory. Every blink, every glance over my shoulder, every reflective surface reminded me that it had followed me, that the faceless figure had not released me from its observation. I tried to rationalize stress, exhaustion, trauma, but the clarity of its observation remained. It was patient, deliberate, unfathomable, and it would not be ignored. It waited in the reflections, in the spaces between reality and perception, in every mirror, window, puddle, and pane of glass. I learned quickly, never look back. Never blink in the wrong moment. Never let your reflection meet its gaze. I understand now, with cold certainty, that the forest did not end at its edges, that the lantern, the fog, and the faceless figure were not limited to the boundaries of trees and mud. They followed, persistent, deliberate, insinuating themselves into the world beyond the forest. And I, helpless, terrified, haunted, am left with one rule, one mantra that I repeat every time I see a reflective surface. Never look back. Even now, the mirror catches something I don't want to see, something that shouldn't exist, something that waits, patient, watching,